meeting to order of the Lincoln Way Community High School District 210 Board of Education regular meeting scheduled for Thursday, November 15, 2018. Please stand as you can for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Glass. Ms. Janice Doyle. Here. Mr. Luchetti.
Here.
Mr. Lulo.
Here.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Mr. Kostick.
Here.
Mr. Kirk.
Here. Thank you, Linda. First item on the agenda is the presentation of the Tournament of Roses Parade flag. Hey.
Good evening. My name is Nick Forlenza, and I attend Lincoln Way East High School. I'm one of the 5 drum majors here tonight representing the Lincoln Way Marching Band.
Good evening, my name is Mary Vogue. I am also one of the drum majors, and I am from Lincoln Way West High School.
Hello, I am Alex Guzzo. I'm one of 5 drum majors in the LWMB, and I'm from Lincoln Way East, and we would like to present the Lincoln Way board with the Tournament of Roses flag.
If you wouldn't mind if we could take a picture with you all. Drum majors in the middle.
Do you want us to go like
Where do you want to do?
I think,
Really, that's fine. Let's do it. How about this? Now, make sure that the flag is covered this way. Day tomorrow. 1, 2, 3. All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
we've got one more thing also, Dr. Kim.
Good evening. My name is Maddie Tomaszewski. I'm also one of the Lincoln Way Marching Band drum majors, and I attend Lincoln Way West High School.
Hi, I'm Jessica Lyons. I go to Lincoln Way Central, and I'm also another drum major. And in honor of school board member today, school board members, School board members day, we are presenting you with pins of the Lincoln Way Marching Band.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Congratulations. The word exciting doesn't seem to capture it. A lot of best wishes. Okay, next on our agenda are student council presidents. So I get to pick who goes first. So we'll start with Manny.
Hello. Yesterday, the Lincoln Way East Student Council attended the SWSC Leadership Conference. At the conference, students met with multiple schools to get new ideas for fundraising, along with ideas to make student council better as a whole. We listened to a guest speaker who gave a message on how to find your voice and to become a better leader. At the conference, after the conference, we met with just our executive board to bring back all of our ideas to try to change things to make a day in the life at Lincoln Way East better. And overall, the conference was very beneficial for all the students that attended. A big event that's happening at Lincoln Way East is that the marching band is hosting a hat and mitten drive, where they will be donating all of the items to the Irma C. Ruins Fine and Performing Arts Magnet Cluster School in Chicago, where 85% of the 678 students live under the poverty line, and their goal is for every student to receive a new hat and pair of gloves. In the athletic department, our football team is still undefeated, and they will be playing Loyola in the semifinal game on Saturday. And Student Council is currently hosting a Silver Turkey food drive where all the donated goods and monetary donations will be delivered to the Frankfort Township Food Pantry by the Student Council Executive Board. Holidays can be especially tough for some of those in our community that struggle to put a hot meal on the table, and donations to the pantry from this drive help make the holidays a little brighter for those families. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. In the recent weeks, we have started our winter sports season. On this last Monday, our girls basketball team came out with a strong win against Plainfield North with a win of 76-53. Tomorrow, we will start our Thanksgiving tournament, as well as Lincoln Way Central, who is also in it. For Lincoln Way West, it is important for us to give back to the community. It is important to us to have the school involved in the community, for our students to see that there are families less fortunate for us. Student Council has created our Thanksgiving baskets that we have been doing ever since West has opened. We pick 10 less fortunate families and we create a full Thanksgiving meal for them where they are able to have a full table filled of food for them that they usually do not get. We are very fortunate that we are allowed to do this, and the families are very thankful for it. In addition, this coming Tuesday, during our advisory period, students are able to come down to our Warriors Lodge and make fleece blankets for children at Lurie's Children's Hospital who have cancer. These children who are staying in this hospital for God knows how long, they are very thankful for these blankets that we are making for them, and they are such wonderful gifts that we are very grateful to provide for them. As well as we are hosting our first Santa Claus community event. This event, we will have games, activities for children who are younger than us. This is a way for our students to get more involved with our community and also give community service hours to our students. Lastly, this last coming week, our asset program has been able to produce a presentation for all our students on social media. Holidays are one of the times that social media becomes a big thing, and we want to teach our students to be safe on social media and not expose too much about themselves, especially with many problems around the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Halloween night at Lincoln Way Central was a great success this year. It was the Saturday before Halloween, and Student Council worked hard the week leading up to the event, decorating the school and preparing for the kids. We were able to make a large donation to the New Lenox Food Pantry following the event, which was perfect timing because Thanksgiving is quickly approaching. Yesterday, Student Council members attended the SWSC conference, as Maddie mentioned, at Giorgio's in Orland Park, where we were able to talk with Student Council members from other schools in our conference and share ideas. It was a great way to meet new people and learn from one another. Student Council will now begin preparations for finals week and winter break. This will be our third year of decorating the lunchroom the week of finals and passing out hot chocolate before school in the morning. Both the holiday decorations and the free hot chocolate enhance the school atmosphere and help relieve stress as students prepare for their finals. It truly makes all the difference to walk nervously into school the week of finals and be quickly comforted by the Christmas tree in the lobby or the snowflakes hanging from the ceiling. I believe all of Central appreciates the festive decorations and efforts Student Council puts in to make this possible. Student Council has also started brainstorming themes for twerk and will begin planning before we leave for winter break. Thank you.
Thank you. Next agenda item, public comment. I have one person sent up. Sharon? Please.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight to the Lincoln Way 210 School District. I'm a resident of New Lenox and have been a resident for the past 25 years, and all 5 of my children graduated from the Lincoln Way Central and West schools. Tonight, I'd like to speak with you about the IASB Resolution Number 2 that calls upon the IASB to lobby for legislation that will allow local school districts to arm teachers, faculty, and other school staff as part of the Student Safety and Protection Plan. Our school buildings are meant to be places of sanctuary, safety, and learning for our children. The presence of guns in schools adds an unpredictable element that puts educators and students at increased risk and layers even more safety concerns on top of the heavy responsibilities already placed on teachers. I understand the frustration and emotions that would lead someone to think that arming teachers would be a good idea. It is critical that we let data drive this decision. There is no evidence that arming teachers will make our schools safer. Arming citizens is not an effective way to stop active shooters. Law enforcement officers are extensively trained to handle the chaos and dynamics of an active shooter situation. Civilians are not. According to the FBI Active Shooter Incidents Report, out of 250 active shooter incidents, there were only 7 successful armed civilian interventions compared with 22 successful unarmed interventions. The notion that a teacher with less training would hit an active shooter is unrealistic, and there is a risk of unintended injuries or death to students and school employees. America's teachers, school safety experts, and law enforcement oppose arming teachers. The American Federation of Teachers, the National Education Association, the Major Cities Chiefs Association, and the American Medical Association have expressed opposition to arming teachers. This March, the Illinois Federation of Teachers passed a resolution to oppose arming teachers. Please vote no to adopt Resolution 2 and think about the negative impact arming school staff members will have on learning communities, including negative social, emotional impacts on our students, teachers, and staff members, as well as redirecting critical financial resources away from education and towards training, retraining, and certifying staff members to carry firearms. Perhaps the states should provide the necessary additional law enforcement protection in rural areas where this resolution was originally put forth. Lastly, instead of bringing more guns into our schools, we need to ensure we are bringing less. According to a Washington Post article from August of this year, since 1999, children have committed at least 145 school shootings, and among 105 of these cases in which the source of the firearm is known, 80% of these firearms were taken from the child's home or those of a relative or friend. So why not discuss a way to prevent children under 18 from gaining access to these firearms? There are programs available, such as the Be Smart campaign, which seeks to prevent unintentional shootings and suicides when children gain access to unsecured firearms in the home. This is a non-political program that focuses on the importance of conversation, responsible gun storage, and community awareness. It is an adult's responsibility to keep their firearms unloaded and locked up where children cannot gain access to them, and so children cannot harm themselves or others, as well as preventing unintentional shootings. I do know the Lincoln Way community just recently experienced the death of one of their students due to an unintentional shooting, and I am deeply saddened by this news. And to my knowledge, that is the second unintentional death by firearm of a Lincoln Way student in the past 10 years. Our children deserve to be safe both at home and at school. I hope you vote to oppose any resolution that would arm teachers and staff. Let's keep our schools and our children safe and free from firearms. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Next, we have our presentations. We'll begin with curriculum and instruction update.
Good evening. So tonight we actually have a two-part presentation for curriculum and instruction. The first part we're going to talk about is going to be the e-report card, and then the second part we're going to have a presentation from our department chairs. On October 31st of this year, the state released the new format for the e-report card. And this is a very exciting time for Lincoln Way because of the results that were on there. And so I'm very excited to share with you a little snippet of some of the things that were on the e-report card. But before I do, I just want to remind us all on what is one of the main factors that's being assessed, right? One of them is the SAT. And as we look at this chart, right, this is one of my box and whisker charts that talks about the performance of our class of 2019, which is our current senior class, and the performance on their PSAT, which they took the fall of their junior year, to the SAT, which they took on the spring of their junior year. And what we see here is we see growth occur with this group of students. We see that we've taken the entire student body and we shifted them over to the right, which is what the ultimate goal is. We want to make sure that we're continually preparing our students to perform well on the SAT that the state is using as its measure across the state. So we're very excited about that. To get into a little bit deeper detail on the SAT and the growth, you can see where we stood as far as our SAT scores are concerned. You see different numbers for each of our 3 schools, Central, East, and West, and the growth associated in each of the 2 areas that are tested, the math and the evidence-based reading and writing. Overall, the growth has been fantastic. We're very excited about what we have seen. And you see our growth is compared to the state and also is compared to what College Board is expecting. So now, the state of Illinois this year has come out with the summative designations. And all schools across the state can be categorized into one of these 4 categories: exemplary, commendable, underperforming, and lowest performing. And so what the state did is they took all the high schools and they ranked them based on factors that I'll show you later. They ranked them from 1 all the way down to 689, I believe it was. And they come up with the rankings for everybody. The top 10% were the exemplary schools. That was the first thing that they did. They ranked that. Then they went down to the bottom. They found the lowest 5%, and they made them the lowest performing schools. Everybody else fit into the 2 categories in the middle, whether it's a commendable or an underperforming. To be commendable, a school district had to have a graduation rate of greater than 67%, and they had to have no underperforming subgroups. And what that means is they couldn't have any groups scoring down in the lowest category, right? So that's how the schools became commendable. If they had an underperforming subgroup, then they were automatically put into either the underperforming or the lowest performing. Now that's a lot to try and digest. Put it in perspective. What ended up happening? Exemplary schools, there was about 68 high schools that were exemplary. There was 552 high schools that were commendable, right? So a lot of the school districts across the state of Illinois, a lot of the high schools fit into that commendable category. And they just separated that top 10% for exemplary. So how did they calculate the scores? And this is what our 9-12, what our designation was based upon. 50% of it is our graduation rate, which is absolutely fantastic. I'll show you the numbers on the next slide. But let's kind of look at some of these other factors here. The 2 other main factors are the math proficiency and ELA proficiency. And they're looking at how good are we at bringing our students to have them meet the state standard on both of those 2 tests. And I'll show you that that standard is set at 540. I'll go a little bit more detail in a minute. A couple of the other ones that are out there is the 9th grade on track, EL progress for proficiency. And what that is our English language learner students and their progress to becoming no longer having to have services for English language learner. Then there's the chronic absenteeism. And then the 2 that are in the gray up there, the climate survey and the college and career readiness, they're going to be part of this total ratings that we're going to be getting, but they're not part of it this time around. There's not enough data that the state's been able to collect to give us a true number in those, and that's part of what's happening over the next few years. The other thing that's not up here that they haven't put in, there's 2 other factors that are going to be part of an evaluation in the upcoming years. One is a science proficiency, and the other is going to be a fine arts. So we'll see how the state comes up with us, how we're going to measure those in the future. So let's take a look at our graduation rate. The biggest category for the high school districts, right? So up there you see the 2017 and the 2018 numbers, and you can see we're right there at the 97-98% graduation rate, which is absolutely fantastic. Look at us compared to the state of Illinois from 87 to 85%. The state went down, and we pretty much stayed the same, went down in a couple of areas, but minuscule numbers. Overall, our graduation rate is absolutely fantastic. And the way that they calculate our scores and the graduation rate, they pull from a 6-year and a 5-year and a 4-year graduation rate. And those appropriate percentages there. Now, how do we compare? Graduation rate. Let's take a look at the graduation rate as compared to our other Southwest Suburban Conference schools. There we are. We are up there at the top. HF is right there, close behind, but the majority of our schools, the schools in our district, are above 80%, which is absolutely fantastic. Compare that to the state, you can see where the state is at about 85. So we're on the right track. Our graduation rate and the programs that we have in place to help our students succeed and graduate from high school are doing the job that we anticipated them doing. ELA proficiency. I talked a little bit about this, and this is the percentage of students that meet the state standard. The state standard sets it at 540 on the SAT test for the English language side of it. And you can see where we're at. For 2018, we're at 54 at West, 58 at East, 57 at Central as a district. 57% of our students meet the state standard of 540. The proficiency target for the state of Illinois says, oh, we only need 43% of your students. If you have 43% of your students meeting that, then you've earned the maximum number of possible points that you can get as far as the summative rating is concerned. What's interesting about this is that each year, the target that the state is going to set is going to increase, right? So the percentage of students that are supposed to meet that state standard is going to continue to grow all the way out to 2032, when the target will be 90% of all of our students. Now, it sounds familiar. It sounds like something that may have happened in the past 5-6 years ago when they were putting it all into place. We'll see how this changes. We don't know what's going to happen with this as we continue to move forward, but it's a lofty goal. We'll see what happens. Math is the same thing. You look at the target that the state has set forth, it's a 39.8, and you can see where we are at as a district and at each of our individual schools. I think one of the more exciting pieces on this screenshot here is if you take a look at our West performance in the math, and you look at the growth that occurred and the students meeting that target of 540 on the SAT, when we went from 49% of our students in 2017 to 60% in 2018. One of the main factors, and our math chairs will talk a little bit more about this when they present here, was really a change in our curriculum. The students for 2018, they are the first students that went through our new math curriculum. And so you can see the results there and the impact of the scores that it had. How do we compare to other Will County high school district schools? This graph is pretty cool. There we are, Central, East, and West, 1, 2, and 3 in Will County. Will County High School District high schools. That's just based purely on the SAT. So again, our teachers and our students are doing the job. They're getting scores that we need them to get the recognition. And they continue to perform and excel, which is absolutely fantastic. 9th grade on track is another one. It's always kind of been on the e-report card. It's been part of it, kind of monitoring what's happening here. But now they're going to give us some point values assigned to it. And we look where we're at. We are right on track. We're at 96, 95% district-wide. And to define on track, it reads that you have to have passing grades in 5 of your classes. So you have to earn 5 full credits throughout your freshman year. And you can't fail more than 1 semester in a core subject, meaning math, science, social science, reading, and English. So that's how they define it. And so where we are at, 95%, it's a good spot to be. The great thing is we know who that 5% is, that they're not on track, and we've got procedures in place to help those students at all 3 of our buildings. Here's our 9th grade on track. Now, I pulled our 9th grade on track and I compared us to a little bit different grouping. All right, I compared us to Naperville's, Indian Prairies, Maine Township, Hinsdale, Palatine, Crystal Lake, Plainfield 202, and Glen Bard. Some of the big hitters as far as school districts are concerned. Large, multi-school districts is what I compared us to. And you see where we're at. Again, 95, 96%. So we're right in the same ballpark as all these other schools. So, what does that mean? All 3 of our schools earned exemplary status this year. Not an easy feat, right? There's only one other high school district that had all of their high schools earn exemplary status. That would have been, wait, just, no, it wasn't Plainfield, it was Naperville. Thank you. It was
They only have two.
And they only have two high schools. So all three of ours earned exemplary status, top 10 in the state of Illinois, a great feat. When you look at the measurements that the designations they put together, this is the first time the state of Illinois has really put in the value in all different areas. And it's allowing us to really look into our school district. For example, the 9th grade on track is a true measure of our freshman performance. The SAT is a measure of our juniors' performance. The graduation rate is a measure of our seniors and their performance throughout their entire 4 years. And all the other factors that are coming into play, I think really are going to help us to get a better understanding of what's going on in our school district. And I think it's a really good one. And then they break it down into all the different subcategories. And we do really well in all of them. So we are in a good spot. We're really excited about our exemplary status amongst all three of our schools. So it's fantastic. One other thing that's on the school report card that I think is really kind of impressive. Again, I talked about that we have 3 of the 68 exemplary schools. We have 4% of the exemplary schools in the state of Illinois. It's awesome. And again, you can kind of see how that broke down over there on the chart there. 552 commendable. And then the underperforming and lowest performing are up there as well. So 679 is the total. All right. The other chart that I wanted to share with you is this one. And this is amongst exemplary schools kind of in our area. And what this one is, and it's not, we don't get graded on this, we don't get a point value assigned to it, but it's just one of those statistics that's out there on the school report card, and it talks about funding capacity to meet expectations. What does that mean? That means the state says we have to meet X amount of millions of dollars in order to educate our kids at an acceptable level. Okay? And so what they look at is they look at our local funds or federal funds or state funds, and they see what we take in and compare that to that number that the state has come up with. And that number that they come up with is different for every single high school, right? It's going to change. But what is exciting when you look at this, you look at the exemplary schools that are on this list. And again, it's that same group that we compared ourselves, the big hitters, the heavy, big schools in the area that are all exemplary. And you look at Hinsdale Central, who spends about 135% of what the state says they need to spend in order to meet the needs of the students. And you compare that to Lincoln Way Central, Lincoln Way East, and Lincoln Way West, and we're at about 66%. What does that mean? We're doing what these other schools are doing a heck of a lot cheaper. And using our resources in a different way. We're doing it for cheaper, and we're not spending what the state says we need to spend. So it's a good spot. I think it's a good number, something for us to keep in mind that we continue to do things really well for our kids. So with that, any questions with regards to the e-report?
I have a question. For the climate survey and the college and career readiness, you said they weren't assessing us this year on that?
That's correct.
So do we know what's going to be in those assessments next year?
Yes. The climate survey is actually, it's open for parents to take now. For students and for staff, it'll open December 11th, I believe is the date. And once that number is based on participation numbers. So we're looking for participation in this is climate survey. And the more that we have participate, the higher that number gets. And so that's really what we're looking at for that. That will be on the report card next year. College and career readiness won't be on until 21-22 school year. But we know what the indicators are and what we have to work on in order to meet that standard. So we have those things in place. We're looking to make a couple changes in the way that we track information. And you'll hear more about that later in the year with regards to college and career readiness. Anything else?
That's awesome.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And now, so I'm going to turn it over to our math department. And tonight we have with us Tracy Plessick from West, Jeff Keller from East, and Brian Mulford from Central.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Keller. I'm the math chair at Lincoln Way East, and I'm here to give you a brief history of time, Lincoln Way math style. just going to give you a little background on how we came to where we're at today with our curriculum. In 2012, when the state mandated a timeline for us to implement Common Core curriculum, we spent the better part of a year or two figuring out what we could do, researching other schools, looking at textbooks, talking to experts, talking to universities. And we realized that either the curriculum had too much problem solving and not nearly enough skill, or too much skill and not enough problem solving. We visited many schools, talked to a lot of people, and came to the realization that no one knows the kids of this area better than the teachers of this area. Most textbooks are designed for California, Texas, or Pennsylvania because they are state adoption states where they adopt a textbook for the whole state. They're not writing for the kids in this area. We know the kids and what they need, so we approached Tim Riley at the time and said we believe we can write a curriculum that meets the needs of our kids, that gets them ready for the SAT, ACT, and their college careers. So that's what we did. Tim Riley then talked to a bunch of us and said we need someone who's going to head this program, someone who's got vision, someone who's got deep knowledge of mathematics, deep knowledge of colleges and their expectations, knows our students, and has an amazing ability to analyze and synthesize and organize. So we came up with the name Jim Ayu, asked him to do it, and he said yes, fortunately. He's brilliant. He has overseen the curriculum writing from day one and is largely responsible for a lot of what it is today. Many of us then came together, and as a whole group effort, we wrote these courses from top to bottom, and bottom to top, and left to right. Everything we have is fully our creation under Jim Ayu's guidance. We started writing Algebra 1. We implemented that in the fall of 2015. So this is our fourth year of implementation. Geometry in 2016, and then last year with our Algebra 2 pre-calculus curriculum. Tim Riley and the administration said we need to prepare our students for the SAT test, since that is how our students are going to get further in their career and education. So what Jim did mostly is researched every SAT question that's out there in the public domain and embedded it into our curriculum. The standardized test prep that we do, there are 1,383 practice ACT and SAT questions embedded in our 3 years of curriculum. That's what was out there at the time. That's how many problems are out there in the public domain. From previous SAT tests, practice test booklets, and anything we could get our hands on. Plus, before the PSAT test, the junior year in October, we reserved 4 classroom days where they experience another 123 practice SAT questions to fill in the gaps, to prepare them for the reading, to really prepare them for the PSAT in October, and then 4 classroom days in April for the actual SAT test where they experience another 152 practice SAT questions. So that is where we're at right now, and so Tracy's going to tell us how we went forward after that.
All right. So this chart shows the growth of our class of 2019. So those are our current seniors. So the fall of their junior year, they take the PSAT. College Board benchmark score for math is a 510. State of Illinois average is a 495, and our district average is a 523 from that test. In the spring, then they come back and take the SAT. College Board again suggests the 530. Our state average is 504, and our district average is 561. So there's really a few things to highlight. Number one, if you look at the averages, of course, they're over what the College Board recommends, but all 3 high schools are clustered together. One question on the PSAT or the SAT is roughly 10 points. So when you look at the spread as either 5 or 6 points, it's less than a question among all 3 schools, which doesn't typically happen in multi-school school districts. So we are all right there. Also, our growth. Our growth is nearly double what the College Board recommends, and it's over 4 times what the state recommends. So again, as Jeff said, this group was our seniors. They were the first ones that went through each class. First year of algebra, first year of geometry, first year of algebra 2 pre-calc. And each year we continue to improve it. So the growth has been great with the new curriculum, and I think our growth is going to continue. Our curriculum works, and we're going to continue to revise and tweak it, and our kids are going to like it. So now, turn over to Ryan, we'll talk about the future.
So we're doing pretty well, but we don't want to rest on our laurels. We want to continue to grow.
So there's really three things that we're going to focus on for our growth over the next few years. The first one is SAT growth. We want our scores to not only stay where they are, but actually get a little bit higher. Curriculum review, and then also to incorporate more depth and equity activities to take our kids a little bit deeper, and also to expand the kids that we're reaching in our classes. First part is SAT growth. Our goal is lofty, but we think we'll get there. Our goal is to reach an average of 600 on the math portion of the SAT by 2021. So that gives us 3 years to go up 39 points. We can do this. Last year, yeah, I doubt we'll get really close. But 2017, our score was a 547 on average. And just by some changes in our curriculum, we ended up throwing 14 points of the 2018 scores. What Jeff was alluding to earlier was we started preparing our kids for the SAT. That was actually in year 2 of our algebra curriculum. So our 2019 test takers have been prepped for SAT from day 1. Students in the 2018, we actually were getting them ready for Park, and then that's no longer a thing in high school. So we had to shift course in 2016, and now this next group will be fully ready to go for SAT prep. So how do we get there? Main area is awareness from not only our teachers and our students, but also the parents. We've done a really good job over the last few years of making sure our teachers are aware of the types of questions, making sure our students are aware of the types of questions. We're working better at getting parents more aware of the importance of the SAT and why it's a really important test for their kids. All of our schools host review sessions for our kids. It takes different forms. Some will do it before school and after school. Some will do it during advisories. But it's directed SAT prep. Math is one of those sessions where we have a couple because there's a calculator portion and then a no calculator portion. I got to admit, I really love the SAT, but it's not just the structure of the test, but it's the amount of data they give us. They give us everything. Just on their website, they've published 8 actual tests that have been used. That's amazing. ACT's got one, by the way. But the data that we see, we can actually see question by question what our kids can do and how they did compared to the state average and then the national average. And we looked at, Jeff, was it 3 questions? 3 questions where we are at or below out of 58 questions. 3 questions where we need a little bit of work. So the other 55 were higher than the state average and the national average on there. So that's good. But we want to push those numbers a little bit higher. Curriculum review is what we're going to be working on over the next few years. Again, our SAT prep stuff is really a 3-year curriculum from Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 Pre-Cal. So we're going to look over the next year or so to start looking at, are the topics that we have in the correct place? Does it flow as a cohesive curriculum? Are we doing enough to prepare our kids for the SAT? Are there gaps that we can fill in? We're also looking at our 4th-year options. So one of the main things for this year, our goal is to review a textbook for AP Calculus, because we need a new book. It doesn't really have any online resources, and that's something that we're pushing for. And we're really, really close to agreeing on a book, so that's good. Also, this is the first year of our JJC Transitional Math course, the Intro to College Math. So we're fine-tuning that and working with JJC and trying to make sure that we've got everything that we need so that our kids that take that course, when they go into, if they go to JJC, they're guaranteed a 100 level placement in math if they get a C with us. So it's a really good opportunity for our kids. And exploring any other 4th-year math options for our non-traditional kids, making sure that we're serving them. All right, this is the fun part. This is the part that's near and dear to me, technology, depth and equity. So I'm going to show you a couple screenshots here of a website called Desmos, which, by the way, is absolutely 100% free, which is always good. But these are tasks where the students go a little bit deeper into the math. The first one here is called Function Carnival. Basically what they do is there's a cannon and a guy gets shot out of the cannon, and then there's a parachute and he falls. And their goal is to try and create the path for what the height of the parachute guy is. Really cool stuff because oh man, it's really tough to see. But that first group right there, they basically have to go straight up and then kind of straight down, which is not at all the path because the parachute's going to slow them down. What's cool about that is the green on the left-hand side, that's the actual path, so they can play the video and then create their graph on there.
and then the blue shows them what graph they created. So what I really like about this activity too is this is how math actually works. You figure out a problem, you try something, if it doesn't work, you adjust it and make it work until you're actually there. But what's really great about this on the teacher end is this is what we see, which looks like a garbled mess because it's everybody's graph at once, but we can actually look and figure out, click on a particular kid and see what their graph looks like and how close they are to the real thing. What's really nice about that too is at the beginning the graphs are all over the place and eventually they start coming together, so we can see that learning is taking place. And then another one that Desmos has a lot of, which is called polygraph. It's basically the same idea as the other one, except it's based off the game Guess Who, where you have a picker and a guesser. So somebody's going to pick a graph for whatever reason. They just really like that graph. They have like a choice of 16 graphs. And then the guessers have to ask questions that have yes or no answers. So it's getting them into the habit of actually asking questions in math instead of just answering questions. Because that's a really important skill for them to figure out what's special about this graph, what makes this different from the others, and to start to differentiate. And that's what the dashboard for the teacher looks like, and we can pick any of those particular rounds and see what their questions are and see which ones they eliminated based on that. So Desmos, again, completely 100% free. I love that. And again, this is the student experience. It's very similar to the other one. Those are the graphs that they can choose from. And that concludes our portion. Are there any questions from the board?
I wouldn't know what the question to ask.
I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
What type of articulation do you guys do with the feeder schools as far as getting those 7th and 8th graders prepped for your algebra program?
We actually got them today. We had our local area curriculum committee. Last year we went and visited the feeder schools and we saw what was going on in their classrooms, shared some curricular things. This year they actually came and visited us and we're kind of alternating that. But then we had a session in the afternoon where we all met, talked about what we saw. Jeff shared some of the things that we're doing in the high school. 2 of our feeder schools shared what they're doing as far as technology goes. They just had a discussion about curriculum.
Do you feel that they're all pretty much on the same page as far as preparing the kids for the 210 curriculum?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
Before you go,
yeah.
I got to say this in public, and I think I sent out the email as well. I might have copied it both when we sent it out. We owe you a great deal of thanks. There's been enough distraction, enough noise going on around our district over the last 4 years. It gave you every excuse in the planet, Brian, Amy, the department chairs, to let the academics start to fall and falter, and you did the opposite. You just tuned out the distraction, focused, and made it better. And I think, Ron, you might have said it best in one of your emails, that the Lincoln Way brand works itself, and you guys make that happen. So thank you, publicly, privately, and wholeheartedly. Thank you for everything.
Awesome. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is community relations.
Good evening. How are you folks tonight? Community relations plays an integral part here in everything we do at Lincoln Way School District 210, and our stakeholders and our students and staff are doing incredible things inside and out of the classroom, and it's been my pleasure for the past month to help showcase that with their peers, their parents, the community, you, the Board of Education, the Board of Education, the media. And once we get going here, I'll let you know that we currently use 3 platforms of social media. We'll start there: Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And Facebook is our most successful platform to date, with nearly 5,800 followers. And on Facebook, we can share all of our positive news and pictures of academics, achievement, athletics, upcoming events for students and staff. Our most successful Facebook post since I have been here was just last month when our Lincoln Way Marching Band won the state championship at the State of Illinois Marching Band Championship game. That reached, as you can see, nearly 10,000 people. It had 200 likes and 72 shares. Twitter is up and coming for the district. Before October 1st, we had our Facebook and our Twitter accounts linked. As you can see on the left, the news was getting out there, but it might not have been utilized to its full potential. So we unlinked our Facebook and our Twitter, and from here we can see that there are pictures happening. Our students are on there, all of our clubs, and the majority of our clubs in athletics and all 3 of our schools have accounts and are using them. So we can share their information by simply clicking retweet. Our Instagram is where our students are. We have nearly 2,000 followers on Instagram. Again, most of our clubs and athletics have a presence here, as do all 3 of our campuses. So here's where we can also share some incredible things happening. So we just will continue to help spreading the news via our social media. It's getting great traction, and it's just continuing to grow from there. We do continue to also send the traditional press release. Sometimes these are a little larger of a story that might not be social media appropriate. It also is where we can send our upcoming events. We send all of our press releases to you, the Board of Education, and also a lot of our community partners, our municipalities, including our chambers and our Park District friends. We also send it to news media outlets such as the Herald News, the Daily Southton, and our 22nd century media publications such as the New Lenox Patriot, the Frankfurt Station, the Mokina Messenger, and the Tinley Park Junction. We also are continuing to send our quarterly newsletter. This one up on here happened to be from summer, but earlier this week we just lasted out our fall and winter newsletter for this term. This gets posted on our website and includes a letter from the superintendent, all 3 principals. It also features a department spotlight, which is uniform through all 3 campuses. It includes a Skyward tip and table talk, which includes ways that you can bring up the asset of the month here at your home. Some of the feedback I had received on this is we weren't sure how many people were actually reading it. They didn't know that a new one had gone out. So this time, just earlier this week, we made sure that we put it out not only on our website, but we also emailed it specifically to all parents and staff. We also put it on our social media and also sent to our community department partners that do receive our press releases. And I'm happy to report that we have had our webmaster start tracking this as of this week. And as of this morning, we had 1,351 clicks just in the past 2 days of people who are reading this newsletter. Lastly, we will be hosting our 2nd annual State of the District, and we just have saved our RSVP that we will have this on Thursday, January 10th here at Lincoln Way Central at the Knights Round Table at 7 p.m. Where we will invite the entire Lincoln Way community to join us as the superintendent and administrators, present an update on what also you just heard from Dr. Murphy about the recent accomplishments, financials, test scores, upcoming initiatives. Promotion for this event will probably begin after next week, after when everyone gets back from Thanksgiving break. We'll start promoting this event on our social media and on our website and through our community partners as well. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Next presentation. Brad presenting?
No, Brad said
I'm going to run this later.
We have with us this evening Bob Lewis and Jason Pinkerton from PMA, and they're going to go over some review of district debt and introduction to restructuring options for the board. Let me grab a mic for just a minute.
Well, hopefully you didn't have more numbers you can handle already, because we have more numbers for you.
No such thing.
So this is the first time that we've been able to present to the full board, so I want to thank the full board again for engaging our services to work with you as a municipal advisor as it relates to your outstanding debt. The goal of tonight's presentation is just to give you an update of where we are in the market, do some education on some of the various features and terms of your outstanding bond issues, talk about the structure of your bonds, and then look at options that you may consider as far as restructuring those bonds if you're inclined to do so. As you're probably aware that the annual payments do increase with each year, so we want to make sure that you're aware of that structure and also the timing for when you need to make certain decisions as it relates to that structure. Please feel free as we're going through it to ask questions if something comes up. If I do address it later in the presentation, I'll ask you to perhaps hold off until that point if I plan to address it later on. So starting off in slide 3, we'd like to begin our presentation just to give you an idea where the municipal bond market is in general. So the interest rates you see on the slide are not meant to be indicative of where your district or any other district in Illinois would borrow at this point in time. They are indices. The index there that you see for the municipal bond market is called the MMD. It's put out by Thomson Reuters. It's a AAA rated bond index. And we use it in our industry just like anybody who works in the equity markets uses Dow Jones Industrials, S&P 500, or your treasury bonds. You look at what the 10-year treasury is doing. We follow this index to monitor trends going on in the market. Now, when it comes to municipal bond rates, and we're often asked, well, how are interest rates? Well, where are you at? What are you talking about on the curve? Are you talking about short end, medium term, long term? So what we've graphed here are the 1 year, the 5 year, the 10 year, and the 20 year. In the background, we also have the federal funds rate as it's the interest rate that many of us in the public are aware of and hear about all the time on the news. And there's some misconception that what happens to the federal funds rate will have a nearly 1-to-1 correlation with all interest rates along the yield curve, and that's just not true. It is very highly correlated with short-term interest rates. So if you look, for instance, at the blue line and how it follows very closely to what the federal funds rate is doing, especially if you look at that 7-year period in which the Fed did not change the federal funds rate from 0 to 0.25%, the 1 year was almost 1-for-1 correlated. But look at that. I always like to point out, look what happened to the 5, the 10, and the 20 year during that time. They fluctuated wildly, even though the Federal Reserve was maintaining the Fed funds rate. And it's because there's other Federal Reserve programs going on, various things that are happening in the municipal bond market, programs expiring, the Build America bonds, bankruptcies of Lehman Brothers, for instance. Those things have their effect on the medium to long-term rates. Now, you can see most recently as the Fed began to raise rates, about 2 years ago now, I think, the 1 year rate followed that upward. 5 year rate had a lot of correlation there, started to follow upward, but the 10 and the 20 year rate did take some direction from the Fed funds rate, but those take a lot more direction what's going on in the 10-year treasury. That's tied a lot to what's going on in the overall economy, what are inflation expectations. So as it relates to the plans that we're looking at in here, there's always sometimes a lot of angst to do something because interest rates are rising, because people are keying in on what the Federal Reserve is doing. But things to keep in mind are some of the characteristics of bonds we're going through, also what the market's inflation expectations are, where we're at in the economic cycle, for instance. Come next July, we'll be in the longest expansion in the history of the United States since they started tracking that back in 1850. Now, that doesn't mean 6 months later we're going to be in a recession, but it also sort of makes you think that at some point, we're due for one, which of course would, historically speaking, cause interest rates to flatten out or to come down some and for the yield curve to steepen again. So, I know a lot of information there, but I would just going into the presentation because we're talking about refinancing, talking about restructuring. It's good to have a basic understanding of where we're at right now in the market. Anybody have any questions on the market before we move in? Okay. So this next section, we're reviewing some of the information as it relates to your outstanding bonds. So we have a couple of definitions we need to go over here first because it's important as it relates to the ability to restructure some of your bonds cost effectively. There's something in our industry called a current interest bond. Most of our bonds are current interest bonds, and those are bonds that pay interest semi-annually and pay principal annually. That's the vast majority of municipal bonds in our market. And that is, I think, 4 of the bond issues are current interest bonds, 3 or 4 of them. And then you have zero coupon or capital appreciation bonds, or CABs. And CABs are very similar to a U.S. savings bond. If your grandparents ever gave you a U.S. savings bond, or maybe they're giving your kids U.S. savings bonds for college, if you get a $50 U.S. savings bond, it's bought for $25. You'll never get an interest payment on those bonds. At some point in the future, usually about 30 years later, you can go in and get $50 back for the $25 that you took to buy it. That difference, the accretive value is what we call it, functions as interest on that bond. You have some outstanding bonds that are issued as CABs. In fact, you have a significant amount of bonds that are issued as CABs, the 2006 bonds and 13B bonds. So typically CABs are sold at higher interest rates, anywhere from 0.5% to 1% higher, depending on where we're at in the market. Also, a lot of CABs are sold as being non-callable. When we're giving these presentations on bonds, we like to go through the analogy of comparing to home mortgages quite a bit, because that's what we're most familiar with. It's the biggest debt obligation most of us have as individuals. The key difference between municipal bonds and home mortgages are the ability to refinance and pay those off. Your home mortgage is callable at any time, essentially. You can get a home mortgage 3 years later, refinance it if you wanted to. Municipal bonds have a period of time which you can't refund them, at least on a tax-exempt basis, until you get within 90 days of that call date. And usually the call date is anywhere from 8 to 10 years after the bonds were issued, I mean current interest bonds. Historically, capital appreciation bonds most of the time are issued as non-callable, meaning you can't call those back in and reissue them at a lower interest rate. You have to pay those to maturity, either through your tax levy or through the establishment of an escrow, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Now, I don't want to steal too much thunder from later in the presentation. There is perhaps another way to restructure these, but I'll cover that when I get to there. The next slide gives you a summary of your outstanding principal by series. So what you see on this slide is just your principal. It doesn't include the interest payments on the current interest bonds. It doesn't include the accreted value on your capital appreciation bonds. At the bottom of each column, you can see the sum of the principal by series. And you can also see the original purpose. Building bonds were authorized. Well, those, so for instance, the 06 bonds were issued to build the buildings and do improvements, to build your two newest high schools at the time and do improvements to existing high schools. The 09 bonds were also a combination of purposes. The advanced funded some outstanding bonds and also did some new money improvements. And then the last three bonds, advanced funded prior bonds. So they're all at some point approved by referendum. The boards of education don't have to go back to the voters to refinance bonds. So, but all these were originally authorized via referendum. At the bottom of the column, we summarized the call feature. 3 of the 5 bond issues are non-callable. And 2 of the bonds issues are callable. The 2009 bonds are callable here this January 1st, 2019. Now, one thing to know about your call options is it's not just a one-day call option. If you go by that date, you can still call them. You have to give your investors a 30-day notice. You can call bonds on July 1st of 19, you can call them on October 1st of 19, you can call them anytime you want after January 1st of 19. So it's not a one-time option. If you don't exercise, it goes away. The 13A bonds are callable on January 1st of 23, and you can see what the average coupon or interest rate was on those, although it's kind of a misnomer to say average coupon for a capital appreciation bond because they don't pay interest. So it's really was the original yield on those bonds. One thing I need to talk about here is some changes that have occurred since you last sold bonds in 2015 in the tax law. As you may recall, last year we had a substantial change in federal tax code, the size of which had not occurred since 1986. When they changed the tax code, they made a lot of changes to marginal tax rates for corporations and individuals. Because of those lower tax rates, they had to look for loopholes to close. We all know, being in the state that we are, in New York and California, one of the loopholes that they close that we don't like is they put a cap on salt. the state and local tax exemption at capping at $10,000. They also turned to the municipal bond market and looked at, well, what can we look to take away here? And what they took away from us was the ability to do something called an advance refunding. So a couple more definitions. These are IRS definitions. A current refunding, probably easier to start with that, is one that occurs within 90 days of your call date. So it's more like your mortgage situation, where you're simply replacing one mortgage with another on the same day. Bonds are current or callable. You're replacing the old bond with a new bond within a 90-day period. So it's very similar to the mortgage situation. Advance refunding was one that occurred 91 days or more prior to the call date. And you may be wondering, well, why would anybody ever do an advance refunding? And it was an attempt to, for a couple reasons. One was to manage interest rate risk. What would happen is, let's say call date's 1/1 of 18, and it's now January of 16. Certain issuers across the country, large issuers, small issuers, would consider doing advance refunding because and what would happen is they take the proceeds of that bond issue, place it into escrow. 2 years later, it would pay off the old bonds on the call date. And while it was in escrow, it would earn interest. As you can see, some of your bonds are advance refunding bonds. The situation I described there is where you're advance refunding a callable bond is often done for savings to manage your interest rate risk. Some of your bonds have been advance refunded to maturity, where the bonds weren't callable at all. So an escrow was set up to make a payment of a non-callable bond at some point in the future. So let's say your levy was $20 million in 2015. And that was not a desired target that the board at one point wanted to hit. It's $20 million. So these numbers I'm just making up for illustrative purposes. And so with the advance refunding of a non-callable payment, you might have lowered that levy to $16 million, but you're still paying the $4 million due on that date. It's just being paid from the proceeds of a bond issue placed in the escrow. And that new bond issue, you're paying off at a date later in the future. That's what happened in 2013, is you took a lot of those payments. Some of the bonds were callable, some of them were not callable, escrow them, and place them out into the future. So it's important to know then and differentiate the difference between advance refundings and current refundings, because some of these bonds that we have to possibly consider restructuring are not eligible for advance refunding. Because A, they're not callable now, or they're not callable at all. So anything you did today, you have to sell them taxable. And what I mean by taxable is when you sell your bonds, you want to sell them tax exempt if all possible, because your investors who buy those bonds don't have to pay taxes on the interest that you pay them. So they're willing to loan to you at a lower interest rate, 3/4 to 1% lower. So if we do advance refunding of any of these bonds, we have to do them with taxable bond issues, which means you're automatically going to pay an interest rate about 1% higher. So you have sort of natural built-in hedge to wait to do some of these decisions, because doing them now would mean you have to sell taxable bonds. By waiting, you'd be able to sell tax exempt. Any questions on that nuance in the tax law?
Just a question on the market with the tax bill. Obviously, with the lowering of the rates in corporations, banks, and insurance companies, have you seen demand for the munis decrease since that tax bill's come into play?
So we've had two different variables occur as a result of that tax bill. When it comes to municipal bond investors, 70% of the bond investors are either direct retail, exchange traded funds, mutual funds, but it's retail at some point. Well, the marginal tax rate didn't change much on them. So this retail still valuing municipal bonds similarly to what they did in the past. Casualty insurance companies and banks, they don't see the same sort of benefit, because marginal tax rate was lower from 31% down to 21% on them. Now, banks were afforded certain additional benefits if they were bonds for designated bank qualified. So what we have seen this year is the value of bank qualification has diminished to the point where it's very nil. But bank qualified, if you designate your bonds as bank qualified, you'd sell $10 million or less in a single calendar year. Most of the time, when we're looking at your financings, that wouldn't apply to anyhow. We haven't seen the sort of drag on the economy that you would expect from, because even casualty insurance companies and banks would buy bank qualified bonds, which you would think, all things being equal, would have upward pressure on interest rates. But the other variable that's occurred this year is a really low municipal bond supply, also caused by the change in tax law, because the amount of refunding volume has virtually dried up, because a lot of the bonds that would have been callable in this year, a lot of issuers chose to advance refund those in 17 and 16 and 15. So now that we're in 18, the bonds that would have been callable were already advance refunded. There's a few current refundings hanging out there, and we've done a handful of those this year getting done. But because of the low refunding volume, that's brought down overall supply to a level we haven't seen in a long time. So that's put sort of a lid on rising interest rates. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on that? Okay, this graph is, got a lot of color to it, but it really helps to illustrate where your bonds are callable. And we've also put on here certain key dates. So, payments that are callable are light blue and dark blue. The light blue represents the 2009 bonds. Dark blue represents the 13A bonds. Now, the shaded dark blue, which now almost looks like a gray, is the interest payments on the 2013A bonds. Now, you can refund interest payments if you needed to restructure them. However, if you restructured an interest payment, it would be taxable. And the maroon bars represent the 2006 caps that's remaining, and the orange bars represent the 13B caps, which are also non-callable. So if you look at 4 important years right here in the center of this graph, are levy years 21 through 24. You have no callable bonds that year. So anything you restructure in those years has to be done via a taxable bond, which would have a 1% higher interest rate. So just keep that in mind. And the light blue bars are the ones that are callable come this January 1st of 19. Before you refund any of those payments, you need to really have an idea of what your goals are, at least for the immediate 3 to 5 years. Because you would hate to refund those payments and not ultimately restructure them the way you wanted to, because once those payments are refunded, let's say you refunded them and put them back in the same spot, or a lot of them back in the same spot because you're trying to lower the interest rate. Well, once you refund those, you exercise that call date, and later on you're like, you know what, we actually want to have this as our goal. Now we go to refund those payments. Now we have to do it on a taxable basis. So the other key feature you need to be aware of on this is sort of jumping out to all of us is the increase from levy year 18 and 19. The deadline to affect that, if the board is inclined to affect that, we're going to look at a little later in the presentation, one of the options we're putting out is to not do anything with that jump. That's not necessarily a recommendation. Our goal tonight is to educate you, give you some ideas for options, and then for you guys to think about it, and then come back and ask us to do variations on those options. But that jump up, your deadline to affect that, if you're inclined to do so, is February 29th, 2020. And practically speaking, you'd have to start having a plan in place by probably no later than November if you're inclined to restructure payments that year. Now you notice you do have some callable payments. That light blue portion is all callable. So that's the portion that would get moved if you want to bring down that levy in levy year 19. And the same thing in levy year 20. We want to bring down those payments. Now, levy years 21 to 24, again, we have no callable payments that year. So anything you do there to restructure more than likely would have to be taxable. The other date that we point out here is January 1st of 23, which corresponds to levy year 21. Now, we put this on levy years. So your bond payments that are due on January 1st of each year correspond to a levy year 2 years before that. So the taxes you levied last fall in November, December, or you probably did a little earlier because these are TWs. September of 17, you collected that in 18 to make the principal payments on January 1st of 19. So everybody, this can get people confused with these different dates. Just ask any Any beginning analyst, the first 2 years, that's probably the hardest thing that they have to learn. Is keeping those dates straight. But your 13A bonds are callable January 1st of 23. So all your principal on 2013A bonds are callable. It's just that you don't have principal on January 1st of 23. Your first principal payment on that bond is not to January 1st of 27. So that's why you may be wondering, okay, those bonds are callable January 1st of 23, but then you're saying there's no callable payments in those years. Well, it's because there's no principal until you get to levy year 25, which would be a principal payment on January 1st of 27. The next slide is the data that flows into that graph on the prior page. And so you can see the two key dates are in blue, where you have that jump up, and you have callable payments that year. The next 4 years are where you have no callable payments. And what are your options to deal with those non-callable payments if you're inclined to lower those payments that year to not have such a big increase? One is to do the taxable restructuring, which I've mentioned a couple different times already. Two is to try to repurchase some of those bonds in the secondary market. We already know one of your big investors because they've called from time to time to ask questions. And sometimes those holders are willing to sell the bonds back to you at some sort of price where you both win. We know this, if you have to do a taxable bond issue, we know what the cost of your escrow is going to be, and they know that too. I mean, you're talking about the Nuveen's of the world. We're not talking about unsophisticated investors. And so they know that as well. But there's maybe some middle ground there where they can sell it at a higher price to you, but that price is still better than the alternative of selling taxable bonds. You won't know the possibility to do that until you do postings on the Emma, because you can't just go talk to one investor. You have to make it available to all. So if you do this properly by putting postings on the Emma that you're willing to buy back some of your bonds, then you engage your broker dealer to start those negotiations. We've done this for some of our clients over the years, and they're very difficult to do, so I hate to put together any sort of plan that counts on that. It doesn't mean we won't try it, but it shouldn't be we shouldn't calculate the analysis assuming that we can get a tax-exempt refunding of those because people are willing to sell the bonds back. Because if they sell the bond back to you, that's a current refunding. So now you can refinance the tax-exempt. The third is to defease the bonds with cash. So the first one is a defeasance as well, but you're defeasing with proceeds of bond issue. The third one is with cash. Okay, so where are you going to get cash? Well, of course, if you're able at some point to sell Lincoln Way North, that cash, the proceeds of that could be used to set up an escrow to defease some of these payments so you don't have to sell taxable bonds to pay them. So you want to provide as much time then before restructuring those with taxable bonds. You want to try as much time as possible to see if you're able to sell Lincoln Way North, get the proceeds of that, and actually defease those bonds and not have to restructure them with taxable bonds. So your deadline to impact levy year 21, the first year you have those non-callable payments, would be end of February 2022. So you have some time to get to that date. Any questions on your outstanding bonds? Oh, I'm sorry, flip back one more page. I do want to point out, although my primary focus when I talk to my school clients is what is the levy for your bonds, and not really focus on the tax rate, because the tax rate's a function of the EAV and the levy. And that's what got a lot of school districts into trouble who did referenda pre-Great Recession, planned for the EAV to continue to grow at these rapid rates. It's not just you, it's school districts all around the high growth areas make these sort of assumptions. And of course, and the objectives are to keep the tax rate level. Well, it's because the EAV is expected to grow like this. So the bond payments are structured to grow in the same slope. And, well, that didn't happen here. It didn't happen in many places. So you saw EAD go down, tax rate go up. So I'm more focused on what's happening with the levy, but still want to point out the tax rate on the far right, where we have built in here that the 4% growth in EAD. The jump in the tax rate from levy year 18 and 19 is about 14 cents with those assumptions. Even if you take out the 4% the next couple of years, it's still going to be around 14, 15, 16 cents. Okay, now let's look at...
So that 4% is taking into consideration new growth plus basically CPI.
Right, so when we get back into these scenarios where we calculate taxpayer impact, which is more of a function of the levy, but it is somewhat a function of the growth of EAD, what we've assumed is of that 4% of EAD, 2.5% is reassessment, 1.5% is new property. So things will vary a little bit on those assumptions, but what that means over time is EAD is growing by 4%, new property comes in the district, that takes up some of the burden of the debt. So you see that, so that helps to keep the growth on the home value we're looking at from growing as much as if you just had a flat assumption. You assume the EAD went by 4, so you assume the home value goes up by 4.
I mean, is that so that's a little bit higher than we've been using for our 5-year, if I'm recalling correctly. Probably just because our inflation rate is a little bit lower. Is that typically what you're using, 4%? Or I mean, are you?
We sort of look at.
Are you using that? I'm sorry, the 2.5%, because obviously the property growth you're going to have to look at the area.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it looks at what the area is doing. It's really not as the 2.5% is not all that important because the EAD is growing by 2.5%. We're growing the home value by that 2.5%. It's more the new property assumption that impacts the taxpayer impact in our analysis. And while you may be more conservative, so the purpose of doing the taxpayer impact has a different purpose than doing your financial projections. You don't want to be too rosy in financial projections because if you are, you can have deficits. Here, you don't want to be unrealistic on your new property assumptions, but yet it's not as problematic as being wrong on your operating side. Does that make so?
No, and again, it's close.
Right.
I mean, it's close to what we're using. I was just curious if it was like a standard that you use.
No. There's some back and forth on discussions. It's not super sensitive to that, and it's more sensitive to it the more years you go out. In the early years, it's not that super sensitive to it. So, what are the benefits of phasing? The last time you did a major restructuring, you did it all at once. A lot of school boards who are in a similar situation of yours, where they have debt that they need to refinance, I always say, you want to get the pretty picture. You want to be able to hold up the new graph to the public and say, this is what we did, this is what our debt looks like now, we took care of the problem. But getting the pretty picture can be more expensive than doing it patiently. I have one DuPage County client that just finished phase 3, next year finished phase 4. They've been doing a gradual increase. They decided let's level it off about $21 million per year, and then we're just going to keep it flat after that. And but it's through a phasing approach. My home district, Oswego, we're doing a 3-phase approach. We have one phase left to do in about 4 years or so. I can't remember off the top of my head. They're hoping for a capital infusion. If they can ever get their $49 million CBD grant, they're on the next list. So you're in that similar situation. Can you get proceeds for selling the high school? But eliminating principal is better than restructuring principal. So what's the benefits of phasing? As I've already mentioned, some of the bonds that are taxable, some of the bonds have to be refunded on a taxable basis if you did it today. So you're going to sell it automatically at 0.75% to 1% higher. One thing I haven't talked about today is the Illinois premium. And that's the premium that you pay, even AAA rated issuers pay, because your last name's Illinois. Whenever you do an official statement, it's Lincoln Way School District 210, Illinois. And because you're in Illinois, a lot of investors won't buy anything in Illinois, not just their state. They won't buy local issuers. Even some of the largest or casualty insurance companies located in central Illinois won't buy bonds in the state of Illinois. And consequently, when you go to sell a bond, Hinsdale goes to sell a bond, they're going to pay a higher yield just because they're in Illinois. When we sold, was it this year? Hinsdale 181?
Yeah, this year.
They paid an Illinois premium. Do you remember 20, 25, 30 basis points, something like that?
It's about 30 basis points.
And the lower your individual credit rating is, the higher your Illinois premium is going to be. So given that your credit rating right now is the highest non-investment grade rating, your Illinois premium will be even larger. So not only are you going to be penalized because you have a non-investment grade rating, you're going to have a higher interest rate just simply for being in Illinois. When I make this bullet, people usually chuckle at me, so if you want to chuckle, go ahead. But the Illinois premium paid by local issuers may decrease over time if the state, we can see some improvement in how the state is operating. Does the state actually begin to tackle its problems? And if there's some credibility in what they do, that credibility will transfer back to the local issuers.
This is where we chuckle.
Yes, this is where you're chuckling. So this also provides more time for the district to improve its own credit rating. And while the district has done enormous strides over the last 2 or 3 years, and you're to be applauded for those. In the back of this, we have an appendix showing your financials and how they have improved. Your TAWs, when you issue them, is later than it used to be. The amount of TAWs are smaller. You're generating surpluses. The plan you implemented, it's doing what you said and even better. It takes time to get that credibility back with the rating agencies. They're not going to do it the very next time. One of my other clients in DePage and Cook County went through a very difficult financial situation, had their rating cut from AA by S&P to one notch above junk about a decade ago, right when the financial crisis started. And that client just returned last year to the AA status. They did everything they had to do. They pulled themselves up. They're back now having 40% fund balance. When they were at a point worse than you, they were doing next year's TAWs in order to pay off last year's TAWs. Okay, your situation didn't get to that point, and it's improved since then. But my point sharing that is it took a while to restore that credibility. They like to see 2-3 audits done to show that you've achieved it. It's great that when we presented to them earlier this year, we had one good audit. 17 audit showed surplus, showed building fund balances. That was good enough to get the negative outlook removed. That was a huge step to get the negative outlook removed. It means they think you bottom out. By going later this year, early next year, to start to address some of the bonds, the chance and probability of upgrade at that time is not very strong. You'll have another audit. We're hoping that when that audit came out that other piece of land that I know you're trying to sell would have been done to add to fund balance. That didn't pan out. So it's one thing that we told them that we're hoping that is not going to be reflected in the audit. By going later, by trying to make a decision on any sort of restructuring towards the end of next year, you'll have the audit just came out for 18. You'll also have the 19 audit. So we'll be able to present to Moody's 2 more audits that are going to show improving trends. I think the probability of getting back into the investment grade category is much better than it would be now for early 2019. And that's a huge difference because getting back in investment grade credit category should allow you to get credit enhancement. We go out and buy bond insurance, is our name for it. So your bonds will have a AA rating on it, even though your rating is lower. Now you may be able to get credit enhancement with a non-investment grade rating, but you still have that underlying rating non-investment grade. The fourth point on why phasing helps is it provides more time to sell Lincoln Way North. I don't want to be in a situation where we restructure some of those non-callable payments, and then you're able to sell Lincoln Way North, and we're like, well, I wish we hadn't done that, because now what do we do with the money that you just received? So doing this in at least 2 parts allows you to contribute that cash towards any sort of plan. And then it allows the district to revisit the goals of the plan in each phase.
Sorry, question. You said it again. And it doesn't have to be. So this $10 million in proceeds, whatever it comes from, eliminates 16 million. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, so we're able to take, maybe why don't you explain how you did the analysis?
Sure. Because of the compounding effect
About
of interest.
Oh, sure.
All right, so what I looked at was a structure that contributed no cash, 50 million, and 100 million. I looked at it linearly, meaning that I looked at it from 0 to 50, what the impact was on the overall debt service, what the impact was from 50 to 100, and what the impact was from 0 to 100, and I roughly took an average. Unfortunately, because of the compounding effects of interest, this isn't going to be a linear structure.
The elasticity increases the more the cash that you have because the restructuring shortens the more money you have. So there's, as you contribute more and more and more, you get more bang for your buck. So, but what the saying is,
So you're not extending out past the years we already have the debt.
right? So you're
not okay.
So the $10 million eliminates $10 million of principal and $6 million of interest as a rule of thumb. So it's just gone, which so you can see the value of putting cash into the objective. And any sort of analysis Jason did was not us opining at all on what the value of the high school should be and what you should sell it for. So don't take any of those numbers as us opining on that. But we have to use something.
So if it was just a smaller dollar amount, I'm not talking about selling a high school.
Right.
We sell the land and we decide to, take that money. It's a much lower.
Yeah,
because it's a. I get it.
Yeah, this is sort of the midpoint, so around the $50 million rule of thumb. So if you get less than that, you're not going to get the same bang for your buck. And it also depends on the structure you're doing. If you do a structure that just keeps going up every year, comes down and then goes up every year, that's going to have a longer extension versus one that has has a higher slope and then flattens out. So it's also then dependent upon the structure.
But you are emphasizing the fact that any defeasance has value in this restructuring process, whether it's the sale of the major asset of the high school, the land, or anything else that we could generate positive cash flow from once we reach our fund balance targets.
Yes.
So if we were to accelerate the ability to get to the fund balances, we could even defease off of operating surplus, could we not?
Yes, you could. I had one client that had to undertake a restructuring, and they are very sensitive to extending the term and the amount that increases, and their district has been blessed with enormous amounts of evidence-based funding money. And they've been contributing that when we do restructuring to eliminate principal. So we've been doing both things at the same time. And that's had a big impact on the cost of the restructuring. So slide 11 gives you an idea of the difference in interest rates between a non-investment grade bond and an investment grade bond in BBB category of credit enhancement. Now, there's not a whole lot of non-investment grade school district bonds we can look at. We have one other client that's non-investment grade, which is actually in the process of potentially restructuring one of their funding. It's not restructuring. They're funding one of their bonds, and we also had to look at CPS and how they sold their bonds. Taking the input on what we got from the underwriter and this other client, what CPS did, we're estimating is, depending on where you're at in the yield curve, roughly 75 to 100 basis points wider in the yield with a non-investment grade bond versus an investment grade bond with credit enhancement. So you can see that there's real strong value to selling them tax exempt versus taxable, and trying to get your credit rating to investment grade before undertaking any substantial restructuring.
So what's the next? So say you went to the next step on this. So you went to A minus. Is the differential between is this the biggest difference? Is this the biggest step up?
Yes, yes.
And what would the step up be between the next? So if you're thinking about this from phasing it in, and you have another 3 years, and you can get possibly 2 upgrades. I'm not projecting, but what's the next step up from the green line here?
Sure. From a kind of a triple B rated category back to like a single A category, you're looking at 40 to 50 basis points, and then incrementally smaller from there.
So let's look at the three options here. And as I said at the outset of the presentation, these aren't at this time any sort of recommendation. We're just trying to give you some various scenarios, and you could ultimately choose something that's in between them. You know, ask us for to do some additional scenarios to present to you. So option one, the district waits to restructure its current debt structure until 2013 A bonds are called on January 1st of 23. And so that means you're essentially allowing, we have graphs that go along with these, so why don't we wait until before I start trying to visualize the pictures with my hands. So the district doesn't adjust the $6.2 million increase, and eventually the payments level out $30 million per year in 2025. And in this scenario, the district could refund its Series 2009 bonds for savings opinion. So if you just want to keep the structure the way it is, allow the increase, then we say, okay, then we should look at refunding the 09 bonds and try to capture any sort of savings you can and lower the interest rate on those. Because I think the interest rate's like 5%. I can't remember.
Those are that's the problem, is because they're the best 4.19.
Yeah, but you only have like a couple payments at the call date, so there's not a whole lot of savings you can make, because you only, like, if you were able to, like, if your credit rating restores, you end up refunding those 13 B bonds, there'll be a lot of savings available there, unless interest rates for some reason at that point in time are substantially higher than today.
So in any of these scenarios, 2019 refunding is basically just if you can get a lower rate.
Right.
I mean, that's the only.
Well, but no, because if you choose to push off some of the payments and start bringing down that slope, those first 2 years, the callable bonds in those years are the 09 bonds. So some of those bonds may be refinanced and put right back, but some of those payments will be taken and moved out. But they'd be moved out on a tax-exempt basis, and also hopefully on an investment grade basis if we do something in the fall instead of in the spring.
Okay. 19?
Pardon?
19.
19. Yes. Why would somebody consider something like option one? Your bond and interest levy is, some may say, some may argue with me that it's lower than it should have been over the last several years, because the district has paid very little principal off on those bonds that it sold originally back in 06 and 07 and 08. And that's because of pushing the levy off. So one may argue, well, we need to let it go up because and get back to where we should be paying. The example I have is we're necessarily paying much more than you were the minimum payment on a credit card. And what we have a chart later in the presentation where we look at how your bond and interest tax rate matched up with your feeder districts compares, adding theirs to yours compares to some other unit districts or feeder districts and high school districts in the area. Just give you some context.
Could that also help with the ratings? Because I mean, one of the things the rating agency wants us to do is pay off principal. So would something like this, not spreading out those payments, help with the rating agencies?
That definitely helps, because when you read your rating report, they do talk about the heavy debt burden, looking at the amount of principal that's outstanding. And any sort of plan that tackles the problem by trying to pay it down sooner than later is going to be viewed much more favorably by them than one that pushes it off again. So that's another reason to consider that. Now, it doesn't mean you can't moderate it some, the slope, and work your way into a higher payment schedule. But ideally, you're not going to end up with something that locks on another 10 years at the end again. Because at some point, you're going to have capital needs that you may not be able to handle out of your operating funds, and how are you going to handle those? So you got to tackle the debt and start bringing it down. They'll never give you advice. They can't. But if they could, they'd probably say something similar. Option 2, the district pursues an initial restructuring in 2019 to modify the $6.2 million increase in favor of $2 million annual increases. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we get to the graph. This would require a partial taxable advance refunding the non-callable 06 cabs to achieve that goal of about $10.4 million. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have to do that if you eventually were able to put some cash into this from wherever source it would come from. So that would be done that'd be done in the second phase. That would be done in 19 phase. The taxable.
The initial phase would be.
Oh, okay. So that would be late 19. Okay. And then that would also levy off at $30 million per year in 25. Option 3 is one that modifies the $6.2 million increase in favor, right off the bat, in favor of 4% annual increases. So now that's just growing by 4% per year. This one would require taxable advance refunding to the non-callable bonds, and the total combined taxable restructuring in this scenario will be about $52 million. So because you're bringing them down more earlier in the structure, you're digging deeper into those 4 years that have no callable bonds. All these scenarios assume a rating in the BBB category. And that we mean in generically, we know you use Moody's, which doesn't use that scale, but in our vernacular, we're using it in a generic sense because 3 or 4 rating agencies have the same scale. Moody's is the oddball. And we added an extra half.
So BBB would be back to investment grade.
Right.
And it doesn't take into consideration any of the defeasement activity that you possibly could have.
No, none of this.
So
None of
no
these considered
assets,
cash.
no other source of
Right.
cash comes in. It's just the existing bond.
Right.
So can you explain what's happening with the extension of the debt, like how many years? Like option 3 is adding.
Yeah, we'll see that in the graphs.
Okay.
So, you got the graph? Yeah. So this is a slide where you allow the increase to occur, and then you restructure the bonds in 2000 when the 13Bs become callable on January 1st of 23. And at that point, you level it off at $30 million per year. So you're cutting off those back-end increases and extending the debt by 2 years. So the gray area represents your current structure. The blue columns represent a potential restructured structure. So there's not a lot done on the early part of your structure then. So this increase from levy year 18 and 19, I'm trying to put this into a magnitude that's easier to grasp. While that increase may look big on a percentage basis on the debt levy, because it is, but the thing to remember is your debt levy is 20% of your overall levy. 80% of your levy can only increase by CPI every year. You're operating. So that increase from levy year 18 and 19 would be on your overall levy, whatever CPI that is that year, and another 5.2%. So CPI has been running lately around 2.5%. So your levy would increase, overall levy that year would increase 7.7%. Obviously, that's a big increase for 1 year, and it's up to the board to decide in consultation with each other and with your constituents about the objectives that you want to achieve. This is the least costly restructuring plan, which you'll see in a couple slides, or in the next slide. After that, these annual increases are about 4.8% per year, and that would equate to about 1% over CPI on your overall levy. And we have some clients that characterize it that way, because what that does by characterizing and talking about it as being a percent over CPI and focusing on the overall levy, it allows you to tolerate some larger increases on the debt side, which means you're tackling the problem quicker and not pushing off as much. So what's the impact? A lot of numbers on this slide. The first box is the debt service prior to the restructuring and after the restructuring. And then we show the change in the levy So this one just increases the levy $8.7 million from what you're currently scheduled to extend and tax. Again, it's assuming no cash contribution. If you did this sort of structure and you had the cash, you actually be reducing the levy, which is obviously an admirable goal to do to your taxpayers. And then we calculate various present value amounts because these adjustments to your levy aren't occurring at the same time uniformly. So present value is useful because obviously from a taxpayer perspective, the money you're paying today in your tax bill is worth more to you than the taxes you're going to pay on your bill later on, especially if you're not one of those tax payers here later on. So on a present value basis at 3%, at 8.6 million is 2.5. And then we calculate the pre-restructuring tax rate that's using that 4% assumption on the EAV. And then we calculate the tax bill on a $300,000 home, assuming that home goes up by 2.5% per year. So the change in the tax bill, but this is where sometimes some confusions happen when we present these restructuring options. When we talk about the change in the tax bill, there's a change year to year. So if you look at going down the column, the increase from levy year 18 and 19 is $150 on the $300,000 home. That's the year-to-year change. Or on the far right, we're showing you the change between the status quo and the scenario. So you're comparing one status quo to one of the scenarios. People get those two things mixed up from when they get these numbers. So I just want to make sure that's absolutely clear. So after that $150 increase, estimated $150 increase, then you're looking at an increase of about $20 per year until they would peak later on in the structure.
So that $150 is the big jump you were
The big jump. That's the big jump.
On an average $300,000.
Right. So you'll see then in the restructuring box, the fourth one from the left, eventually the payment peaks at $690, and then it starts to go down because we have leveled it off, and you have new property coming to the district, which means that person's share of the bill debt's going to start going down. And that's where you get the difference in the far right column. So for several years, there's essentially no difference, and then there's reduction in those later years because we chopped the slope off. And then you have an extension at the end. And this is where some confusion comes in again because people think the bill's going to jump up $631 in 1 year. No. The bill, if you go over the column, is actually going down $9. It's $631 higher than the baseline because in the baseline there's no debt there. Okay? Let's look at scenario 2. This is one where we say, okay, we want to start paying and tackling the debt and allow it to go up faster, but we don't want that big of an increase all at once. So here's where you have the $2 million annual increases. So the annual change in the debt service levy is 8.5%, that $2 million increase. On average, it's not going to be the same because the calculation changes as the denominator changes each year. But again, the debt levy is 20% of the overall levy, so your overall levy would increase by approximately 1.7% over CPI. So we have one client out in Kendall County that really took advantage of the 0.8s and the 0.7s. They put into place at just the right time a plan to do. They were going to let the overall levy go up by 3.75% per year. Well, when the operating rate was only going up by 0.7 and 0.8, we brought so much debt forward. I mean, their debt picture is just transformed from what it would have been had they just continued to push it. What they were trying to chase a rate and just kept pushing debt off, and then they finally realized that wasn't going to work long term. So this one has a slightly longer extension than the prior one. It adds another year at the end, but it chops it off at $30 million. So the extension's coming from bringing the slope down and not taking and hitting it all at one time. So the increase in debt service is $30 million versus $8 million in the other scenario. And then you can see the present value amount, the impact to the taxpayer is. The bill's $105 lower than it would have been in levy year 19 if you did nothing for your $300,000 home. and then gradual improvements annually thereafter until the last 3 years were extended. The bill continues on around $600 per year. Any questions on this scenario? The last one is number 3, where restructuring takes place to immediately implement a plan where the bond levy goes up by 4% per year until you get to the end. I notice the slope is not only positive, but it's increasingly positive because of the compounding effect of that. But here, the increase would be about 0.8% over CPI, which should make sense because your bond levy is going up by 4%, and CPI is going up probably more around 2.5%, is what your operating site is. So, much better savings up front. You can see that on the next page. Significant reduction in the tax bills for your taxpayers.
Hold on. When you say savings, you're talking about
annual savings.
To the taxpayer.
Yes, thank you for stopping me.
Not an overall.
Yeah, if you look at the estimated change in the levy, that would go up by $108 million.
The fund, with the magic word.
Right. Now here we assume, and again in all these scenarios, that the financings took place at a time that you're back in investment grade category. If the refunding of the what series is called now?
The initial 2009 bonds?
Yeah, the 2009 bonds. If that occurs at a junk status, we estimate the cost to restructure those and push them out, because a lot of those get pushed out, would be about $2.8 million higher as a non-investment grade bond. Slide 19 does a side-by-side comparison of these scenarios, showing the change in the rate and most importantly in the tax bill. Again, none of these are putting cash into these scenarios. Later on, if you want to see some with cash in there, we're more than happy to do them. We're hesitant to put something in there because once a number gets reported, then everybody thinks, well, that's the number that the school district wants. And so whenever you get to that point, you want to see that, we got to make sure it's absolutely clear these are hypothetical scenarios trying to show the value of cash to the restructure. Okay, not to mean to be where you want to sell it or where somebody should buy it. Then this slide is a comparable analysis. It's always useful to do comparison. You did it earlier with your test scores and your book score. By the way, congratulations on the scorecard. That is a remark. I was at another school district last night and they didn't have one nearly as good as yours. But it was a similar type of presentation. Yours had a lot better news. So here, of course, as you know, you have 5 feeder districts. I hope we got all 5. And then we add to your current tax rate, and we get to their tax, so the combined tax rate. This is so we can compare you to unit districts. So you have Manhattan on the lower end at 62 cents combined towards debt, up to New Lenox on the higher end at $1.15. And how does that compare to like Plainfield? Plainfield's at 90 cents. Their debt's leveled off. I work with them, and we have their debt leveled off. Indian Prairie's debt's leveled off at 50 cents. So they're the best one on this chart. So we're throwing what we consider the high growth districts. We're not just throwing in the Hinsdales and the Maines, the ones that did their building years ago. And I know Maine just passed a big referendum, so their rate will go up some here, but most of these are the high growth districts. Oswego's at $1.72. We were above 2 before. Oswego's implemented a plan to level, after 2 years of increases, they had actually done a plan where they were going to level it off at $30 million per year, I think, on their bond levy. And actually, no, it was going down to 27.5. And they decided, 30.
It was 27.5, 30, and now they're at like 35.
Yeah. So then they decided it wasn't be at 30, and they determined to they're just gonna push your debt way off. Let's get this stuff paid off. So we did a $2.5 million increase that hit our bills this summer. Next year's another $2.5 million increase, and then levels off at $35 million. And there's a substantial drop off in 10 years. That's what they decided to do. But the rate's still high at $1.72. You know, trust me, I pay it. Valley View's at $1.30. Valley View's in the middle of a restructuring plan, a multi-phase one, where it's been going up by a certain percentage each year. So we get to the point where we're going to do these bonds. We're hoping to be able to do them on a tax-exempt basis. In about 5 more years, we're going to level their payment off at that point. Julia 86-204, they have not had to restructure. They're at $1.18. Their payments are structured to go up every year, though, I believe. And then the Manuka, 111 and 201. We did 111, that's their largest feeder district, the one that has the most debt. They're at $1.53. So you can see how those rates compare to where your combined rates are right now. And then we showed you the percent of the overall levy that the bonds are. So for New Lenox, that's 18%, and all the way to a low of 9% for Manhattan. You know, Frankfurt here in a couple of years will have no debt, by the way. Their bonds will be paid off. I know Summit Hill's debt is going up annually. They've restructured. I think it eventually flattens off. And New Lenox is in the process of doing a restructuring. They just did a phase earlier this year. They didn't do it all at once. They're doing phasing. They took care of it like the next 4 or 5 years, and then they have some variations to do, later variations to take care of at that time. So then we looked at, okay, what if you jump to 56 cents from 42 cents and do the same analysis? New Lenox would jump from 18.56 of the overall levy to 20% of the overall levy. The combined rate would jump from 115 to 128, and then we show you, repeat again the other school districts for comparison purposes, and we also show the other school districts compared as a percentage of overall levy. So the point of sharing this analysis is you're sort of right there already in the middle, before and even after, if you allow some sort of increase, whether you want to allow it happen all at one time or you wanted to gradually work it in like an option 2. Yeah. So there's some appendices. I don't plan to go over them, and they're there in case you need to refer them if you have some questions that relate to them. Other questions that you may have on the restructuring plan or anything that we've given you tonight. I know it's a lot to digest. Some of you have seen this before in our interviews and finance meetings. Some of you this may be new. So,
what was the plan you wouldn't count on?
But that would function. That would be a tool within any of these plans where you would go to. If you had to restructure some of those non-callable halves, if you're able to repurchase them more effectively, that would just reduce the cost of some of these restructuring plans. It's not going to have like significant improvement over it, but every dollar it counts. It's not going to like drastically change the picture of these graphs.
So based on this presentation, what is the next step in your opinion for us to do? I mean, obviously we have to talk about it, but what's the timeline, I guess?
Well, the one recommendation we're coming out that we will give tonight to this plan is to not implement anything until you get towards the end of next year. It allows your rating to improve and allows you to find out more of what's going to happen on third high school. And plus, you only need, if you decide to restructure some, you only need to restructure the next couple of years, because then you get into those 4 years of the wall where everything's uncallable, so you restructure the next 2 years, and then you leave those next 3, 4, 5, and 6 alone, because if you haven't done anything with Lincoln Way North by the time we get to the end of this year, then you have 2 more years to see what happens with Lincoln Way North, so you can take cash and attack years 3, 4, 5, and 6 from now. So your job then over the next several months is to talk about these plans, talk to your constituents, and decide what is the objective you want to see done for your debt. See what sort of plans start materializing for the Lincoln Way North, so that we can come back and present updates to these plans as you gather more information. We're going to see some scenarios, so that by the time we get to maybe August, you've narrowed in on something you want to at least do for the next couple of years. We're just going to leave them alone, or we're going to restructure those next 2 years down to this point, and then we're going to wait and see after that to see if we can get some cash to tackle those years 3, 4, 5, and 6 from now.
What's the timeline on that? Because I mean, it's probably like a multiple board meeting steps, right? I mean, you're gonna have to come back and present it one, discussion, resolutions, actually, going to Moody's again. I mean, what's your like timeline from when to start that process versus like how many months are we talking about?
Okay, yeah, so let's work backwards. So the deadline's in February. I don't like putting plans in place because your deadline's in February that you have to sell in February, but I mean, just in case we're having some market turmoil. And generally speaking, when the market has most turmoil, the financial crisis, when Lehman Brothers melted down, or Bear Stearns, there's about 2 or 3 week period of time you didn't really want to be in the market. It wasn't months. So it's hard to imagine we're going to be in a situation worse than that in the next few years. That said, ideally we would be geared so we could sell no later than December, beginning of December of 19. And so you back up from there, you got to have your OS official statement. That's what you send out to investors. You need to have that ready by November, which means you're talking to Moody's early November, late October, because we want to give ample time for Brad to get your 2019 audit done. Hopefully the state's not screwing up the, what is it, this, like they're out of this year. A lot of the audits are delayed because one state report's not coming out. But, so we can give them another audit, increase the probability that you have an upgrade. So that would be late November and October, which means we're starting to draft documentation around late September, which means you probably want to have board action by late September, early October on a resolution that you'll approve to restructure the bonds. Which means probably by August, you want sort of a final decision. This is the structure that we want to employ, at least for the next 2 years, but have a vision for the years after that of what you want it to be. Knowing that in 2 years' time, you can revisit the years after that. So if we're making that sort of decision in August, you're going to start looking at scenarios. We really want to probably start looking at them from January to start talking about, you guys can go back to Brad, give him some ideas. Maybe we come back and talk to your finance committee first, share some ideas there, boil those down, bring those back to the board, maybe in March. Whenever, maybe you have some workshop or something geared up for these sort of things.
That's what I was thinking. Right.
And then we get the dialogue from the board at that meeting, come back and refinance it, maybe talk finance committee again, come back out, May-ish, June-ish, doing more sort of, so you can vote on it then. It's just the latest you need to vote on it, I would say, is August. So this is generally the timeline I think you should follow on this.
There's a lot of what-if scenarios in there. We get to a point where there's not an upgrade, the audit's delayed or whatever. We can pull the plug on this at any time.
Yeah, you can pull the plug on it. But if you're inclined to restructure those next 2 years, what's nice about the phasing component is by only tackling those 2 years, it's not a very large bond issue relative to your whole debt portfolio. So even if you have to sell those at a non-investment grade rating, it's not like you're doing $100-some million financing. What would it be? 22 million-ish. So the most important thing that the board can do is to keep doing what you've been doing the last couple years. Stay true to the course. Keep generating the surpluses, making the tough decisions on the operating side. So as you've experienced, the worst thing for a bond rating is structural imbalance. Prolonged structural imbalance, especially, will kill your bond rating. And that's unfortunately what happened here, in addition to some of the other noise that was occurring as it related to what was going on in finances.
Any other questions? Gentlemen, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well done.
Okay, thank you.
Well done.
I know it's a lot of information, but it's very important that I think the Board of Education has a good grasp of this to make an informed decision. And I know it usually takes 3-4 meetings to get this stuff done.
I have a grasp of it, I don't know if it's good.
That's okay. Well,
Smarter today than we were yesterday.
Yes.
Fred's phone will be burning.
Yeah.
Next, we move on to our consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of approval of the regular meeting minutes of October 18th, 2018, approval of the closed meeting minutes of October 18th, 2018, approval of the payrolls for October 19th and November 5th of 2018, approval of District 210 advisory minutes of October 15th, 2018, and out-of-state travel. Does any member wish one of these items to be pulled and discussed separately? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote, please.
The vote is, ooh, excuse me, the vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Move on to our action items. First action item is presentation of the invoices for October 19th, 2018 and November 15th, 2018.
Motion to approve the invoice in the amount of $1,900,838.42 dated November 15th, 2018.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and second. Any questions regarding the invoices?
I just had a question on LaForce Inc., which was the key card access and supplies. Is that still part of the capital projects?
Yeah.
Portion of it, or is that
Rich is
like
not
an
here this
ongoing?
evening. Rich is not here this evening.
Oh, it's not, okay.
But yes, I believe that's following up on finishing the project. We still have some lunch list stuff that had to be done.
Any other questions regarding the invoices? If not, we have a motion. Second, call for a vote, please.
Vote is open. Vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Next is Treasurer's Report for October 2018. I'll entertain a motion to accept the Treasurer's Report as presented in the package.
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Brad.
Thank you. So for the month of ending October 31st, the district received revenues of $2.9 million, while we expended $6.9 million. We're beginning in our cash reduction area. But at this point, actual cash was $28.3 million with all the TAWs paid off, resulting in a positive fund balance of $28.3 million. Included in there is our cash flow analysis. Now, realize this is different than budget. This is just where we projected the timing of the cash coming in. And we actually had a positive cash flow variance on the revenue side of $436,000, mainly to do with the fact that Summit Hills Elementary School made 2 transportation payments in the month. And then on the expenditure side, we had a positive variance also of $224,000. We expended less than we thought, resulting in $660,000 higher October cash balance than projected in the previous months. As far as then shifting to the actual budget side of things, on the revenue, where things are going well. As I mentioned in our last report, we had 2 tax distributions in September. So obviously, October's tax distribution was $8.8 million less. That's not affecting us because we had collected more in September. Actually, it really did help out on our cash flow. But overall, we're expecting to collect $1 million less in taxes. We expected that. That's been adjusted in the budget. Also lower, we're trending $375,000 behind on other and $1.1 million behind on state. Here again, we expected that, and the budget has been adjusted. We collected more in the prior year than expected. Finally, coming into the expenditure side, Salaries and benefits right in line where we expect. Now, within the benefits though, Fund 50, we were trending a little ahead. We're expected that though because we're going to have a mid-year, we just got notice of it, a mid-year rate adjustment because we paid off that ERI. So we're going to be going from a 12.12% municipal rate to 10.57, that's down 1.55%. That should cause us to pull in line in Fund 50. Otherwise, everything else is trending well. Tuition is trending ahead, but it's not a concern because we've actually paid an extra payment to District 843 on special ed tuition. That just means we're going to have them paid off sooner than we would have in the prior year. So everything's looking good and within budget.
Any other questions for Brian regarding the treasurer's report? If not, we have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
Vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion
All right,
passes.
thank you. Next action item, student activities report for October 2018. I'll entertain a motion to accept the student activities report as presented in your package. So moved. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion with second. Any discussion regarding the student activities report? Has got anything?
There were no accounts that had a negative balance at October 31st, so good work by the principals, and Kelly for staying on top of the activity accounts.
There were no negative balances. Just real quick, Kelly. Has there been any update on the reunion accounts that you at one point were kind of trying to move off of this?
On
The class of?
Class
of accounts?
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's just,
You haven't gotten
we
around
should
to it.
probably add it to the agenda at some point before, moving forward. And
Okay.
maybe have further discussion on how we want to handle those. But I just know on our end, if a class calls that has a balance that they'd like to use for a reunion, we send them the money to a class sub account, and we tell them that we are not taking any money back that we consider. So we've been able to get some of them off the books that way.
I just recall it was kind of, you were trying to eliminate some of the burdens on your staff.
Right,
managing
yeah.
that. So it is starting through attrition just to.
It
make
is,
its
just
way up.
by people calling
Fair enough.
and wanting their balances. It used to be that they would donate back, certain part of their bank or whatever that they wanted to keep with their reunion or reunions coming up, but we just tell them, no, it's their money, you can keep it.
Very good. Okay, thank you for that update. Any other questions regarding the report? If not, good.
The vote is open. Vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Next, our employment report. Mr. Rob.
All right, under employment, Teresa Flynn, paraprofessional, Brittany Mosley, paraprofessional, Angela Trend, bus driver, Rachel McCain, food service worker, Olivia Blaney, paraprofessional, and Corinne Tomzak, dispatcher. Ask the board to approve the employment report as presented.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the employment report as presented.
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Okay.
Motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none, call for a vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you. Retirement Rob.
Under retirement, we have Laura Don, bus driver, and Mary McGivern, teacher. Ask the board to approve these retirements as presented.
There's a request to approve the retirements as presented. Is there a motion?
So
Motion and the second.
Yep.
Any discussion regarding the retirements? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote, please.
The vote is open. Vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Rob.
resignations. Under resignations, we have Heather Davis, paraprofessional, and Curtis Hatley, bus driver. Then under leaves, we have Julia Seidel, teacher at Lincoln Way East, requesting an FMLA as the board to approve these personnel, the leaves and resignations as presented.
There's a request to approve the resignations and leaves as presented. Entertain a motion. A motion and a second. Any discussion regarding this? Hearing none, call for a vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Shipwell. Appreciate it. Next, the IASB resolution. Scott, you want to kind of step this through?
Sure. As the board is aware, you've received emails, correspondence regarding IASB resolution number 2, student safety and protection. There are 3 board operations and duties in the new proposed resolutions. The first, student safety and protection, is not recommended by the IASB committee. The number 2 is, number 3 is not. The other recommendations kind of fall in line with what our board has done in the past. There's really nothing that would change philosophy moving forward. But in discussion with several board members, I felt it was best to include this on the agenda. A potential motion to approve the IASB delegate to advocate for legislation that would provide local boards the option of developing student safety and protection plans, which may include eligible employees to be armed at school. Every year, we have a board representative either attend the meeting, or you can also vote by proxy, where the Lincoln Way board would fall on these. So I felt it best to have this item number 2 as a vote, if the board so chooses.
So at issue is the idea that we've had the public comments on it. There's several emails directed to the members as well regarding arming staff at the school. If I understand you correctly, the current IASB position is to recommend that action.
From the committee, yes. So the resolution committee recommends to adopt.
And there's been some discussion both with the superintendent and amongst members individually that we may want to step aside from that recommendation and oppose that recommendation and give that direction to our delegate. So at this time, I'd entertain a motion to oppose that recommendation.
So if we vote yay, we're opposing it.
Correct.
Okay.
And that we, the direction we give our delegate. So at this point, I'd entertain a motion to that extent.
So moved.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion regarding this opposition?
Who is going to be our delegate?
Well, Aaron is our delegate, so
Okay,
he'll either
got it.
vote in person or via proxy.
You are going to do that, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ron,
So, yeah,
can you grab the mic?
Sure. Couple of levels. Been a gun enthusiast for 41 years and have taught police officers, both new recruits and veterans, since 1988. And from a police standpoint, I think it's a very difficult situation with the amount of training they have to sometimes make split-second decisions. Not seeing what the teachers, what the curriculum would be, the training would be, at this point I don't think it's a good idea to put them in that situation. It's a difficult situation to put police officers in, and they're trained and have a lot more extensive background and understand use of force and another covered under the Good Samaritan Act, but just from a perspective, I do not think it's a good idea to allow that to happen in our classrooms or in our district.
Thank you. Any other comments regarding this particular topic? If not, we have a motion and a second. I call for a vote, please.
Vote is open.
So a yea vote is to oppose
This
this.
one.
All right.
Actually, look, just to make clear, this is
We will
motion to
change that
approve.
motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I say that, it'll show.
Okay, just want to make sure we all don't vote yes and now.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're opposed. Okay. Oh, got it.
There it is. No
Okay.
motion to oppose.
At the end. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody clear?
Motion to oppose.
The motion to oppose is unanimous. The motion passes.
All right, just for clarification, I probably should have read this part of the motion, but I did get an email from member Glatz that she was not in favor of the proposal either. So I just want people to know that she was not in favor of the recommendation for Carrie in the building. So, all right, thank you on that one. Our next one is semester grade measurement. Again, I'll turn this over to member Beth for our update on this.
Okay, so just a little background. The advisory committee has spent 3 separate meetings discussing this, vetting this, doing research, doing comparisons with other districts. At our last meeting on Monday, it was a unanimous vote in favor of the proposed change. Dr. Fury surveyed the staff, I think I mentioned that at the last meeting, and then she also had follow-up lunch and learns, and the staff is overwhelmingly in favor of this change. We also had an opportunity, which I thought was really good, to get this perspective, to speak with a college admissions officer. And he said that colleges only look at semester grades anyway, and that quarter grades were not necessary in their process. So therefore, I would like to make a motion to move our semester grading measurement from a quarter-based system of 40-40-20 to a semester-based system of 80-20.
And the 80 is what, the 20 is what?
So the 80, currently we have 40% for the first quarter, and then it stops, and then you start over, and then it's 40% for the second quarter, and then 20% is final exam. This would open up the grade book, and it would make a cumulative grade from August until finals, and that would account for 80%. So there would be no cutoff date for the quarter, essentially opening up the grade book, allowing teachers more flexibility. Oftentimes it allows for better measures of student achievement over time. You could look at a course that has 1 test in first quarter and then 3 in the second quarter, and so that's not actually a fair measurement.
So you would move away from quarterly?
We move away from quarters to a semester, yes.
That would be the following.
This would begin,
January.
no, it would be the 2019-2020 school year, so it would start then.
Grades would continue as in the contract. Grades must be posted and updated every 3 weeks. So parents would get a 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, and then 18 at the end of the semester.
And this is in line with what most districts do.
We have a motion. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion or clarification on the motion?
Would this require any discussion with our with the Teachers Association, the collective bargaining agreement, any kind of language changes?
No, will not be any language changes.
Any other questions? If not, we have a motion and a second. Call for a vote, please.
The vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Our final action item, our naming rights. With this, I'll turn it over to Member Costa.
Thank you, Joe. The committee, consisting of Mr. Luo and myself, met on November 7th to vet the idea of naming the Central Fine Arts Center, Charles R. Stark Center for the Performing Arts. In order to collect information on this, we put out a press release. It went to all the papers, the Tribune, the Herald, the Patch, the Local 3, the Junction, the Patriot station, asking for feedback from the community. And got quite a big response. About 65 letters had come in with people's thoughts in the matter, and it was overwhelming in favor. There was actually only one gentleman who was against it, and had nothing to do with Mr. Stark personally. He just didn't think that it should be named after any living person. He didn't offer any further comment beyond that, other than he thought that it was fine that the Rosenquist Auditorium was the Rosenquist Auditorium because he, tragically deceased after that he had passed away when they named it. Based on that, Mr. Lulo and I discussed what would be involved. We seem to have support for the measure as far as the cost of the district. And before, when this was first brought to me, before he went through this process, I contacted Mr. Stark to say, would this be an honor that you'd be willing to accept before we go through this hassle? We had been approached about it. And of course, he was very honored, but the next thing that came out of his mouth was, I know we're still in tough financial times over there. I will only do this if you let my family absorb whatever the cost might be for any signage. So with that, based on the correspondence received, and I hope you've all had a chance to read many of these letters, got from going back to 1971, from students 2014 that weren't even his students that were somehow impacted, along with several other community organizations as well, all seem to be very much in favor of this. So with that, it is the recommendation of Mr. Lulo and I that the Central Auditorium be renamed the Charles R. Stark Center for the Performing Arts.
Just a moment of protocol. You attached some minutes in here.
Yes.
So why were those?
Those were attached because, thank you for bringing that to the attention, Joe. As you know, this has only been done twice, to my knowledge, in the history of our district here, in our 65-year history. I spoke to John Izzo to make sure we followed protocol for this based on current board policy, and what he recommended was to not only approve the motion, but just have the board approve the meeting minutes that were presented as well. So I asked that we also have those included as an agenda item. So I guess, I don't think.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we entertain a motion right now to accept the minutes as presented regarding the naming rights? Is there a motion?
So
second. Motion and second. Any discussion regarding the minutes?
So just backing up, what is the protocol from start to finish? I mean, I know we talked about it last meeting, but
It was
the
to
protocol was
form a committee, get feedback about the idea, and bring it to the board.
It was to take it out to a public forum outside the board to get community feedback regarding it. So that's why I believe, Joanna, you can speak to this because you did it. We directed staff to put out press releases to get it out so that people could provide feedback. I also saw Joe shared it through social media posts and other things. And then obviously he shared with us the written feedback he got, but I also know that he also received many other types of communications regarding this particular thing. To the best of my knowledge, nothing negative to the extent.
Just what I showed you.
And this started when you were approached by constituents
Yes.
asking for this to be done. This was something that started here and then we went out.
So that was the primary process associated. So with that, we have a motion and a second regarding the minutes. Any other discussion regarding the minutes? Ron and Joe made the motion. Second. Good? Okay, so we'll call for a vote on the minutes.
The vote is open. The motion is unanimous. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
So, Chris, just before we vote, when a facility is to be named or renamed, the board president will appoint a special committee to consider nominations, make a recommendation, along with supporting rationale to the board. The board will then make the final selection. So this would fit the policy.
So last meeting, when Joe brought it up, we asked Ron and Joe to do that. They did it during the time. Okay, so now we're at the point where we would look to entertain a motion for the naming rights. And Joe, do you want to read what those naming rights would be?
Yeah, naming rights, is that technically what we would call it?
It's on the agenda.
Sure.
You can always call it what you want to call it.
Make a motion to name the Central Auditorium the Charles R. Stark Center for the Performing Arts.
There is a motion. Is there a second?
second.
There's a motion and a second. Discussion. Now, I do have some discussion. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
I just
Jen.
wanted to say, my students were taking a test today, so I read every one of those emails. They just kept going and going and going, and I saw some of them actually brought like a tear to my eye. I thought they were overwhelmingly kind and just painted a picture of him as being someone who has impacted probably tens of thousands of lives overall between students and families. So I thought that some of them were unique, interesting, decades old, and people still are obviously speaking about him.
Yeah, certainly. There's definitely a lot of people there. I've never heard, I didn't know most of these people that wrote in.
Yeah. Sorry, grab my printer, but I would concur. The thing that I was impressed with, was by the response. I thought there'd be
Like 2
a
people.
couple,
I know,
3
me
that
too.
would be advocating, and when we were into the almost 70 written, I mean, it takes time to do a written response. It's one thing to pick up the phone or shoot you a quick text, hey, what a great idea, but these were eloquently written letters. However, we do have an absent member that did send me an email that I did provide copies to all the members today. And she did ask that I read aloud prior to the vote. So out of respect for Member Platts, I'm going to go ahead and read her email now. And it says, regarding naming, I regret that I cannot be at tonight's meeting in person, but I felt it was important that I share my position regarding this agenda item. First and foremost, my comments are directed toward Chuck Stark. Mr. Stark, like so many other amazing faculty members, is commended for all he has done to elevate our district, and particularly our music program. What I need to say, though, is why Chuck Stark? Why not a student or students who have lost their lives serving our country? Why not the music teacher who lost his life and had already made such an indelible footprint on so many young students' lives? Why not the original founders of the school district? This list could go on, because there are so many amazing people who could be honored with this type of dedication. Naming a building or wing or etc. is a very slippery slope. It's an emotional decision, and it is likely there will be many others we have not honored that are just as deserving. Where do we draw the line? If we want to name buildings or wings after someone, we need to have definitive criteria, not be based on emotion or because he or she has done so much. Again, there are so many other potentially deserving faculty and, as mentioned, even students. If we want to name building or wings, let's consider a practice that many universities or hospitals do when a donor makes a large 6- or 7-figure donation. The criteria is certainly defined. It is not emotional. We have an amazing scholarship program. I think it would be wonderful to honor Mr. Stark's legacy via an annual scholarship, and I'm sure there are other creative ways we can discuss. Naming a building without definitive criteria is too emotionally based, and there are also others like Mr. Stark who are also deserving of this type of recognition. If the board feels strongly that naming a building and its wings is a practice we want to start implementing, then I urge us to create definitive criteria as well as a thorough vetting process before we select one. Select one person at this time. Thank you, Christine Glatz. Again, you can see that she is not necessarily opposed to the individual. She's looking for the concept so that this doesn't become what about me type scenario. And I had a conversation with her about it, and I understood what she said, but I did tell her I would read this out loud for the other members to hear. Okay, so we have a motion. We had a second. Are there any other discussions regarding the motion?
I mean, I'm she's not here to respond, but we do have a vetting process where.
And she understood that. We did have a dialogue regarding that. And again, I don't think it was the process. It was the definitive nature of the process. Why would an individual be selected? Not the process itself that you discussed.
I mean, so that, I think it's a good point, but I think this goes back to, he was instrumental in basically 4 auditoriums and running them and getting them started, and that's, you're specifically putting his name on one of those. And he was spent 40 years building that program.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we've got a school with a 65, 67-year history. 46 of those years, Mr. Stark was here. Why Chuck Stark? Well, I hope Christine read all the letters. I really do. As far as criteria, as far as money, I got to tell you, I'd much rather give somebody my money than my time. And I think the human capital in this case is far outweighs the dollar figure to have something to consider as sponsorship. So with that, I think we're ready to vote.
If there's no other discussion, we'll call for a vote.
The vote is open.
So what is this, I mean, what is this, I understand the naming, so what does this entail? Like,
what's the vision?
What's the vision of what is going to occur?
I think it's really going to be simple signage, quite honestly, at the auditorium as architecturally is feasible, based on what sign people and what's the signage that's in the building now for some of these things. Something consistent with that.
And
as I said, this would be done by Mr. Stark's assistants at no expense to the district.
We would, from a school standpoint, want to have, we'll pick an evening or an afternoon, I would think, to have a ceremony. I think that'll come from the insistence of our Central Music Program to be a part of something like that.
Stacy Jackson, the Central Music Chair, she was one of the authors of these letters, and
Mike Baldwin was the second.
the two senior music instructors, at least seniorly tenured music instructors here at Lincoln Way Central. I'm sure that's something that they will insist on spearheading in conjunction with when Mr. Stark's able. Hopefully they'll be able to attend.
Obviously, just to reiterate, this is done with the verbal assurance that the expenses.
Oh, that's the question.
All right, so we're back to, we have our motion and a second. The vote is open. Please.
Vote is open. The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
Congratulations, Mr. Stark and Joe, for you taking on this, and Ron for your time. Appreciate it. Look forward to hearing what the celebration and ceremony will be. So thank you. All right, on to our informational items. First one is our District 843. Ron?
I attended that meeting. It was a short 25-minute meeting, mostly reports, nothing really significant as far as any controversy or issues. Pretty simple. It's good to have those once in a while.
Good to hear.
You're not addition to this. So that concludes my report.
Nice progress over the last 6 months, so thank you. Lawyer requests.
Report requests are included in your backup materials for your review.
Questions regarding that? If not, the fiscal year 2020 budget calendar.
Brad has updated the budget calendar for 2020. Hard to believe we're already moving forward, but as you can see, different adjustments have been made for the tax levy adoption for next fall. It will be moved to October, and then the TAW adoption can be moved back to November as we're improving our cash situation. And then the closures is an updated budget calendar, and that's something we'll continue to monitor and have as a normal informational item.
I was going to suggest maybe we can put together a calendar for the restructuring discussion. We had something that kind of coincide with our budget calendar.
Very good.
Steps we need to be taking, timelines we need to be.
Put it right in there at a different
Well, no,
level.
I think it should be outside the budget calendar.
Well, I mean, along these lines, but
right.
something.
Right. No, I agree with what you're saying. I just didn't want to see it.
Right, no, not in there, but along those lines.
Absolutely, great suggestion. Because we may end up having a workshop or committee of the whole outside of our regular meetings. Good to get those on the calendar. Okay. Any other questions regarding the budget calendar? If not, the building and grounds report.
Buildings and grounds report is also included in the backup materials for your convenience. Rich is not able to be with us this evening, but any questions we can get into him and get an answer right back to you.
Anybody have any questions regarding the building and grounds report? Okay, thank you. Next is the enrollment report.
Enrollment report is included. First page is what we received from our feeders and just kind of a comparison of last year to this year, so you can kind of see enrollment per grade level by feeder district. And then the second page includes some analysis from help from our citizens. Mr. Whaler provided some analysis using his cohort method. As you can see, we continue to see a decrease in enrollment over the next several years. Take time to review, and any questions we'd be happy to answer them. But see some districts, if you do an average, then you can see some are a little bit above the average, some are a little below. Some you can see a reduction every year as you do the average per grade. This is based upon enrollments that were provided to us by the feeders.
Any questions regarding the enrollment? Great report.
Very, very thorough. Thank you,
Steve. You're in the audience. Appreciate your help. Always your feedback and insight. Next, District 210 Advisor.
So in addition to finalizing our position on the semester grading measurements, we also started a new topic, which I think is going to probably take a few months because it was extremely heavy. A lot of information is how we weight our AP and honors grades. It is very interesting the way that we do it. It is definitely not traditional. It is definitely not in line with most other schools in our area. So we're going to take a look at that. It's really nice because a member of our committee is actually that college admissions person. So he has been really helpful in explaining to us how they take these reports from all these schools that have a 7-point scale or a 6-point scale or a 4-point scale, and then the way we do it, and they have to normalize all of those into a report that works for them. So that's a lot of work on their end. So it's really interesting to see some scenarios. It was really nice. Sharon put together a report about like extreme cases and like put together how this kid had so many AP and honor classes and what the weighted grade was, and then what it would look like if we just did a standard point up grade like most school districts do. So this topic I feel like could go on forever. It was some great discussion. It was a longer meeting, but again, this is going to take a while to do some research. He suggested that we reach out to colleges and we ask them about what they are looking for in our transcripts. So it was really interesting.
Is there a summary you can give of how we differ?
Oh yeah, we have like a multiplier essentially. So for every semester that you take an AP or honors class, you get a multiplier on the end year of that. So let's say that your student, or my daughter, she's in an AP class and an honors class. So that is 4 semesters. At the end of the year, she will get her entire GPA multiplied by 1.04. So it's 0.0.
So we get extra indexing.
So yeah, so it's interesting. So you actually are multiplying and weighting all of the grades, not just the honors and AP classes.
And most schools don't do that.
No, most schools are just the point up. So if you're in an honors class and you get a B, you get credit for an A. If you get a C, you get credit for a B. So anything a C or above, you just get 1 point up.
Just for those classes?
Yeah, just for those classes. So in our case, it benefits the students slightly, but then in listening to the college admissions people, they don't really even look at weighted grades anymore. So we have this huge process and this giant formula that's it's a lot to look at in the analysis of it. And most of them don't even look at it. They look at the strength of your schedule, and then they look at your unweighted GPA. So I just think we should probably take a look at this and see what we're doing.
It does.
Well, we could change the scale for the diploma.
Absolutely.
Based on the change, obviously.
Yeah, we would look at our magna cum laude, summa cum laude once again, but also we received, I think it was just today, the classifications from the NCAA on what they accept on weighting and what they don't. So that will be brought to the next meeting as well in terms of how they would like to see it moving forward. So I think it would be a very good discussion.
I also thought it was extremely interesting, all the parents in the advisory committee, the majority of them essentially said, I have no idea what this is. Like, I don't understand this. This is not how it was when I was in high school. This is not my understanding of what we normal regular schools do with it. So it was really interesting, the multiplier situation and how it affected kids' grades, which is how we end up with some students who have like a 6.0 on a 4-point scale, because they take a ton of AP and honors classes, so that multiplier just increases every single year. Yeah, it was really interesting.
Yeah, I've never been able to figure it out. The man to my left had tried to show me the math.
Yeah. Good thing for Skyward, right? It's a nice little algorithm, I'm sure they have in there that calculates it for you.
I didn't know if I should high five them or ground them.
Yeah.
So it's like, darn, it looked good. But thank you, that'll be another good one to get to feedback.
For sure.
All right. Any other questions about regarding the 210 advisory? If not, community relations report.
Pride sheet is in your backup materials. Jen Hannon has now completed a month with us as a left, so congratulations, Jen. Doing a nice job.
Thank you. Next, asset of the month.
Asset of the month for December. It's a good one. Resiliency provides students with strength and fortitude to confront the overwhelming obstacles they are bound to face in life. I think our math department does an outstanding job of teaching resiliency. At home, be available whenever and wherever your kids want to talk at school, identify at-risk students that I think we do a pretty good job of. In the community, sponsor discussion nights for parents and teams and publicize the topics in advance.
Next is our legislative report.
Well, we'll see what's coming down the road here. We obviously have a new governor. I will be attending an Illinois State Board of Education meeting tomorrow morning to provide kind of a roadmap of what they think that we will see here over the next 3 months. So I will report back in December, but there will be a couple interesting ones down in Springfield, I believe.
I'll just give a quick update. We had a gentleman last month come in and talk to us about the lighting out front. And so I took some time and went out there and stood, and it is dark. There's no other way to describe it. It's fascinating how they could have redone Route 30 the way they did it and not have that address, knowing that there's a major high school, like right here. When you go down by Providence, where they did 30 in Calgary, and there's plenty of lighting. So I did reach out to our state rep, in understanding that there was an election coming up and there was a lot of other distractions. I will follow up with her, and I also reached out to the county, because I understand that schoolhouse is county, not village. So, but I did get an affirmative response from them as well, but they also asked that I wait till after the election, because again, everybody's a little bit distracted. But now that that's done, so I want you to know that we did hear them, they did take the action, and they both know I'm coming back. And so, and the coming back will start tomorrow. I will follow back up with them. I'm sure I'll get the Thanksgiving holiday Heisman, but that'll be okay, because it does need to be addressed. I did go out there and park at the church and walk it a little bit, and I was a little bit fearful because I was like, you can't see what you're doing.
And we did have the traffic engineers have been out over the last 2 weeks to study the traffic patterns both in the morning and after school. They'll be working with our architects and DLA to bring back recommendations. So they have been out the last 2 weeks.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, our 2019-2020 school calendar, first reading.
So this is just a draft school calendar. Next year is, we work around the IHSA calendar. The IHSA works around basically Thanksgiving and then works backwards for the start of fall sports, and then from Thanksgiving forward for winter sports. And so with that being said, everything goes back a week next year. So we're proposing Institute Day on the 19th of August. We don't typically do an Institute on a Monday. We like to start the previous week. But if we start the 13th or 14th of August, we're going to hear about it because that's the first half of August. So we would propose starting August 19th. We would have a 2-week break, winter break, as we do this year. And then in addition, spring break would be the 23rd through 27th of March. The reason for that is the SAT will be Tuesday, April 7th. And we didn't want to come back one day and take the SAT. We wanted to have a full week of preparation, have those students back in their routine, and then take the SAT on April 7th.
Plus extended vacation sometimes.
Yeah.
You don't want kids missing.
Yes. So this is what we propose. This has been shared with the feeder districts. And just today we received notice from the state that, well, I guess our regional Office of Education Superintendent referred to it as the Wild Wild West. Next year, if there are snow days, we can replace those snow days if we provide instruction to those students during that time. After just getting this information today, I already signed up for a seminar December 10th, where we're going to get some more clarification and information. So exactly, online learning while they're home. So we get a snow day. Every teacher gets onto their get onto the web, get onto email, send the kids the assignment. Here's what you need to work on. We provide proof to the state here's what was assigned to those students in all those periods.
That store manager got this done, right?
Yeah, so as I said, this is new today. We only received, I think, Amy, was it 3 pages of information?
Yeah, I brought it.
You brought it, 3 pages of
I kept
information.
reading.
So the other thing they did was take out the limit of minutes of instruction per day. By doing so, that does allow schools additional flexibility for professional development time. So we could have, this would allow, it's a pendulum swing. The pendulum swung the other way, hey, you can't do half days, they don't count anymore. Now a half day can count. So we could dismiss students at 12:30 and then have teacher meetings from 1 to 3.
For a
So,
snow day type this year.
no, that's a regular day as well. So, like I said, the pendulum has swung. I will go to a meeting on December 10th to bring back more information at our December meeting, but it was interesting. I'll just say that, and I'm sure I'll hear more information tomorrow at the superintendent's meeting.
I just have one quick question about the
Yes.
calendar. Was there any further discussion, movement towards seniors having extra time off at the end of the year?
We do not. What we would look to do, because that would not be necessarily part of the calendar when we schedule our graduations,
Okay.
we would work that into approval when we put the graduation dates in.
Okay.
This wouldn't have to be a formal process. So, for instance, this year we're doing graduations during the final exams. We're going to see how that goes. If we like that, then I would propose that again next year. And then seniors would be done, like, let's say, around the 20th of May. So this is a draft. I'll bring this back for more discussion in December.
You let me know how that goes in your meeting, because I'm going to implement that at work.
Yeah.
Because I'll just email people, we'll stay home.
Stay home, yeah, I know.
Board meetings.
So here, this calendar references quarters with the change in the grading.
Yeah, we'll just take out in the quarters and we'll still have institutes on those days. Yep.
Any other questions regarding the calendar? Superintendent's report.
The main thing, I want to thank the board. This district has made significant progress here over the last several months, really last couple of years. And the leadership of guidance and diligence of the members is appreciated by me, the rest of the administration, and our staff. So thank you for the guidance and leadership as we continue to work our way towards improvement.
Any other district business? Can you just real quickly give us an update? Wasn't the trades career fair
Yes.
earlier in the month?
Dr. Ferry, give us a quick update,
Sure
please.
thing. On November 1st, over 300 students came from all three, well, the other two Lincoln Ways traveled over here during different sessions. Over 300 students ended up out willingly and signing up to come over, and from Central coming out of their classes to attend. It was an all-day fair. We had over 20 organizations and unions and tradespeople who came in, set up their tables. A lot of them had hands-on activities. There was a jackhammer going. There was bricks being laid. There were pipes being bent. So a lot of the activities were very hands-on. All the trades folks were very impressed with our students, saying they asked great questions. They were very interested. A lot of great interest. So we feel very good about our very first one. We already had a debriefing meeting to see what we could do differently and even better next year. We already have a date set. It's October 30th, 2019, and we continue to want to move forward and make that even a better event for our students.
Feedback from the students was very positive. Very positive.
They wanted more time.
So was feedback from the community, actually. There was one thing where a couple people just stopped me. I wish I could have been here that day, but it sounded like it was well received. So thank you for whoever the concept and put it in motion.
Are we still around 20% that's on core college or two trades? Is that still out?
Needed.
Absolutely.
Next is correspondence. There's a couple.
There was legal women voters of Palos Orland area urging to vote no on Resolution 2. And then also, we received a Stanford University teacher congratulations from Dominic. You may remember Dominic Toronis last year, class president of Lincoln Way Central, but he nominated Dr. Provis, and so congratulations to Dr. Provis as Dominic recognized Steve as making a difference in his life and his transition from high school to college. So congratulations, Steve.
Always nice to end on a nice note. Any other comments or questions from the members? Ladies and gentlemen, there is no closed session this evening. So,
Sure?
yeah. I'm getting texts from your wife and husband right now. So I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.